Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Endless Tail Lights, Stalked on the Highway. I had been driving for nearly 3 hours, the night thick and quiet around me like a heavy curtain. The first time I noticed the car behind me, I thought it was coincidence. A pair of headlights, steady and distant, appeared in my rearview mirror as I merged onto the highway. It was common to spot other vehicles on the road, but something about that one felt off. The headlights stayed at the same distance for miles, neither getting closer nor falling back. I glanced over my shoulder briefly when I stopped at the first gas station, but the car was nowhere to be seen. Relieved, I filled up and grabbed a coffee from the mini-mart, then headed back out. But the headlights reappeared quickly, settling into the same pattern behind me. My stomach tightened. They weren't just behind me, they were following me. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just another driver taking the same route home. But as the minutes turned into an hour, I realized the car wasn't just nearby, it was matching every turn, every lane change, every stop. I slowed down at a rest area to check my phone. No signal. Typical for this part of the highway. I sent a quick text to my partner, running late. Driving home now. No reply. Probably asleep. I tried to shake the growing unease. Maybe the driver was lost, or tired, or just happened to be going the same way. But it was the kind of feeling that crept up slowly, an instinct, cold and insistent. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the car was there. Just a dark sedan, taillights glowing faint red, headlights glaring when it passed my view. I didn't recognize the make or model, just an unremarkable vehicle. But the driver's attention was unmistakable. I imagined eyes watching me, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to test my theory. I took the next exit and made a quick loop through the small town. When I got back on the highway, the car was gone. Relief flooded me, brief and sweet. But as I passed the on-ramp, there it was again, sliding effortlessly back into the lane behind me, as if waiting. I tried to stay calm. I told myself to focus on the road, to stay composed. I increased my speed. The car followed, matching my every move. Each mile ticked by slowly, the road stretching endlessly ahead and behind, the glow of the taillights never fading from my mirror. I thought about calling the police, but I hesitated. I had no idea where I was exactly, the GPS signal was spotty, and the interstate had several exits and back roads. I was alone, with only a vague sense of direction. And calling the cops without a clear threat felt excessive. What if it was just someone who happened to be driving my way? Still, the feeling in my gut was growing darker by the minute. I tried everything I could think of. I slowed down suddenly at a gas station, no sign of the car. I waited for 5 minutes, then pulled back onto the highway at a cautious pace. The headlights appeared behind me almost immediately. I sped up to 80, then 90 miles per hour. The car stayed right there, unwavering. I felt trapped. The highway was deserted, save for the two of us. Not a single other vehicle passed us in either direction. The night air was still, the only sounds the engine's rumble and the faint whisper of tires on asphalt. I checked my rearview mirror again. The car's red taillights glowed like twin embers in the darkness. Panic started to settle in. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. What did this person want? Why was I being followed? I ran through possible explanations, my mind refusing to settle. Once, I thought I saw movement in the passenger seat, a figure, hunched and motionless. but it could have been a trick of the light. I considered pulling over, turning off the road, and calling for help, but where? There was no cell service, no gas stations, no houses close enough to see. Just trees and fields, dark and silent. I forced myself to focus on driving. At the next rest stop, I parked near the far end of the lot, hoping to lose them in the shadows. I waited, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the entrance. No car pulled in. I sighed, relieved, and started to relax until headlights appeared at the far edge of the lot. They moved slowly toward the exit, then merged onto the highway behind me again. I realized the driver had been waiting all along. It was deliberate. I tried to keep calm. The highway curved ahead, winding into a forested area. I knew my options were limited. There were no alternative routes for miles. The idea of being chased through the dark woods was terrifying. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of the driver's face in the mirror. Pale, expressionless, eyes locked on me. The headlights flickered as the person tapped the horn once, twice. No words. No attempt at communication, just that cold, persistent presence. I didn't respond. I kept my eyes on the road, hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. A thought crossed my mind: the car might be waiting for something. Maybe a spot where I would stop, or slow down. Maybe the driver was trying to intimidate me. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. The idea of a stranger stalking me on an empty road was chilling, primal. I thought about all the stories you hear about people kidnapped, assaulted, disappeared on lonely highways. I never imagined I'd be in that position. The miles dragged on. I scanned for any sign of help, a police cruiser, or even a well-lit gas station. Nothing. I tried making a call again, no signal. Then, an idea. I could drive toward the nearest town, bigger, with more traffic and people. If the driver continued to follow me, someone would notice. Someone would help. I switched on my eye beams to signal I was aware of their presence. The car didn't back off. Instead, it stayed glued to my tailgate, unwavering. I pressed the accelerator. The speedometer climbed. I held my breath, praying the car wouldn't ram me or try to force me off the road. At one point, the car blinked its hazard lights on an odd, aggressive gesture. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or a taunt. I felt tears pricking at the edge of my eyes, frustration and fear mixing in a bitter cocktail. Why me? What had I done to deserve this? Hours ago, I had been calm, ready to go home and sleep. Now, I was fighting to stay sane, to keep control on a dark highway with a stranger shadowing my every move. The road stretched ahead, empty and unforgiving. I was alone, except for the car that never left my mirror, matching every turn and every stop. No matter how fast or how far I went, it never disappeared. And I didn't know why. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to convince myself the car behind me was just a coincidence. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The highway stretched out ahead, a dark ribbon winding through the empty countryside. The road was mostly straight here, with only occasional curves and faded signs warning of exits miles away. The radio was off, the silence pressing in on me. The quiet made the headlights behind me feel louder somehow. I thought maybe if I took the next exit, the other car would go its own way. But as soon as I exited and slowed down, the car behind me took the exit too. It wasn't just following the highway, it was following me. My heart hammered against my ribs and I struggled to keep my voice steady as I whispered to myself, "Okay, stay calm. It's just a driver. Maybe a cop or something." I considered pulling over to the side of the road, turning on my hazard lights and waiting for the car to pass. But the thought of stopping there, on the shoulder of an empty highway at 2 in the morning, with only the faint glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness, didn't feel right. What if that car pulled up behind me and someone got out? What if it was someone waiting for me to stop? Instead, I decided to drive to the next town. It wasn't far, about 10 miles down the road. I thought I could find a well-lit gas station or a convenience store where I could call for help or at least be around other people. I flicked on my turn signal and prepared to exit, my eyes flicking to the mirror. The car did the same, matching my speed exactly as I slowed down to the exit ramp. The headlights stayed locked on me, unwavering. I swallowed hard. This was no accident. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, trying to think through what was happening. Why was I being followed? Did I cut someone off earlier? Was it some kind of road rage? Or worse, was this something planned? The highway gave way to a narrow 2-lane road lined with dense trees on either side. The small town I was heading toward was just a cluster of dimly lit buildings with a few blinking signs. It looked quiet, maybe even deserted at this time of night. My phone buzzed twice in the cup holder but still showed no signal. No chance for a call. Great. I spotted a 24-hour gas station with its fluorescent lights humming above the pumps. I pulled in, heart racing, and flipped on my hazards. The other car slowed behind me, pulling into the lot carefully but not parking near me. It stopped several pumps over, lights still shining toward my car. The driver's window slid down halfway, but I couldn't see inside. The car was a dark sedan, older model, and the headlights were dim but steady. I kept my doors locked and rolled my windows up. I didn't want to communicate. I wanted to disappear. But the man in the other car stayed watching me. I started the engine again, planning to drive off and find a more public place. As I pulled away from the pump, the car followed instantly, matching my speed. I accelerated, trying to put distance between us, but it kept pace. I veered left when a well-lit diner appeared at the edge of town and parked outside, hoping to hide in the crowd. The other car pulled into the lot behind me and parked at the far end, headlights off. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the dark sedan through the diner's large windows. There was a man inside, sitting in the front seat. I caught a glimpse of his face, middle-aged, clean-shaven, with cold eyes that didn't leave me. It was like he was waiting. I debated calling the police, but without a signal, that was impossible. I thought about asking the diner patrons for help, but the place was mostly empty except for a lone waitress wiping down tables. She glanced my way but said nothing as I slid out of the car. I walked into the diner and sat at the counter, trying not to seem panicked. The waitress approached slowly, her eyes flicking to the window behind me where the dark sedan waited. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I nodded and ordered a coffee. "Just trying to wait out a bad driver," I said, keeping my voice low. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, then changed her mind. "Not the first time someone's had trouble on this stretch of road," she said. "You might want to call the sheriff. They don't come out often, but they keep an eye on things." I thanked her and sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth against my shaking hands. When I looked out the window again, the car was gone. A wave of relief washed over me, but I knew it was temporary. The road outside was still dark and empty, and I had no idea how long the man might wait. I finished my coffee quickly and stepped outside. There was no sign of the dark sedan anywhere. No headlights, no engine noise. It was as if he had vanished. I rushed back to my car, double-checked the locks, then started the engine. I kept the headlights low and pulled carefully back onto the highway. For the first few miles, the rearview mirror was empty. But then, just as I started to relax, two dim headlights flickered into view behind me. They were back. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The dark sedan was following me still, relentless and patient. No matter how fast I went or how far I drove, it was there waiting. I pressed the accelerator again, racing into the night, hoping the next town would offer more than just empty buildings and cold coffee. I needed help, and fast. The highway stretched out forever ahead, and the car behind me never disappeared. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, ribboned by dim streetlights that flickered intermittently, their glow barely pushing back the thickening darkness. After the last rest area, the road narrowed and curved sharply, winding through wooded hills. I had hoped the twisting stretch would shake whoever was trailing me, but the headlights remained locked on my tail, unwavering. I forced myself to stay calm, rationalizing it. Maybe I'd passed them earlier and they were just coincidentally on the same route. But the way they matched every lane change, every brake, every acceleration told me something else. This was no coincidence. My phone lay on the passenger seat, dead. No signal. I tried calling emergency services a dozen times since the first moment I suspected I was being followed, but no luck. The isolation of this highway was suffocating. There was no one around to help, no nearby towns, no gas stations for miles. I swallowed hard. The car behind me was a black sedan. I'd been watching it since the beginning. Its taillights glowed red, unblinking, and I occasionally caught a glimpse of the driver's silhouette through the tinted windows, a figure hunched forward, hands steady on the wheel. Every time I glanced in the mirror, my heart jumped. My mind raced through every horror story I'd ever heard. This was real life, no ghosts or monsters, just another human being, and that made it worse. This was someone who chose to follow me, someone who might be dangerous. I knew I had to do something. I wasn't going to let myself be a sitting target. But what? The next town was at least 20 miles ahead, the last place with a real chance of help. With no GPS signal and the car still behind me, it felt like I was trapped. I slowed down, tapping the brakes slightly, then accelerated. The car adjusted its speed with uncanny precision, never too close but never leaving either. It was like a predator stalking prey, patient and deliberate. Every instinct told me to pull off the road, find an open place, maybe confront whoever was behind me. But there was nothing, just endless trees lining both sides of the highway and the oppressive dark. My fingers trembled as I reached into my glove compartment for the pepper spray I kept for emergencies. My hand closed around the small canister, and I pulled it out, holding it ready on my lap. If I had to stop and face whoever was following me, I wanted to be prepared. The thought made my stomach knot tighter. I took a deep breath, settling my nerves. The highway curved again, this time downward into a valley where the fog hung low and thick, reducing visibility to a few yards ahead. I flicked my eye beams off, hoping to blend into the darkness and maybe lose the car in the fog. The headlights behind me blinked, briefly dimmed, then brightened again as if adjusting. They followed, unwavering. I realized then that they must have been watching my every move for hours. How else could they know exactly when I slowed down or sped up? It wasn't chance. It wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate. My mind flashed to the events earlier that day, the stop at the convenience store, the brief exchange with the cashier who had glanced nervously at the door when I walked in, the old man on the side of the road who had watched me too long as I passed. Did any of those moments matter? Had I unknowingly attracted attention earlier? The fog thickened, my headlights cutting through the mist in short, uneven bursts. I slowed, sliding my hand over to the passenger side and grabbing my phone again. No signal. A mile later, I spotted a narrow pull-off, the only one for miles, lined with gravel and bordered by a row of dead trees. I tapped the brakes slightly and pulled over, heart hammering. The black sedan slowed behind me, then came to a stop about 20 feet back, engine idling softly. I sat frozen for a moment, staring at the rearview mirror. The car was still there, dark and silent, red taillights glowing like eyes in the night. The driver was motionless. I debated my next move. Calling out seemed foolish. Running was pointless on this deserted stretch. I reached for the door handle, testing the lock. It clicked open smoothly, and I hesitated, then locked it again. Better safe than sorry. I switched off the engine and sat in complete silence, listening. The only sounds were the faint whistle of wind through the trees and the distant hum of the other car's engine. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds, time blurred in the dark. Then the other car's engine revved suddenly. The vehicle backed up slowly, its headlights sweeping past my windshield, then turned and disappeared into the fog without a word. I exhaled sharply, relief crashing over me. For the first time in hours, the rearview mirror was empty. I waited several more minutes, hands clenched tight on the steering wheel, watching the road behind me for any sign of the car's return. None came. Finally, I started the engine again and eased back onto the highway, nerves still raw but steadying. I kept my eyes glued to the mirror, vigilant for any sign of pursuit. But the road behind me remained dark and empty. The rest of the drive was tense but uneventful. When I finally pulled into my driveway just before dawn, I locked the doors and sat in the car for a long moment, heart still pounding beneath my chest. Whoever had been following me had vanished, but their presence lingered, an unwelcome reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't shadows or spirits, but people who choose to make fear their game. I didn't sleep that morning. Not really. Every creak and distant noise made me jump. The highway was behind me now, but the memory of those relentless headlights and the driver who refused to disappear was burned into my mind, a dark mark I wouldn't forget anytime soon. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the dark highway stretched endlessly before me. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over somewhere populated, somewhere safe, but the nearest town wasn't for miles. The thought of stopping and getting out of the car, alone, in the middle of nowhere was worse than the company I had. Better to keep moving and hope for help at the next exit. I tried to shake off the lingering dread, telling myself this was just some random driver. Maybe someone lost, or a night shift worker trying to catch their ride home. But no matter how fast I drove, hitting 80, 90 miles per hour when the road allowed, the car behind me held steady. It wasn't just following me, it was shadowing me, step for step. At a gas station back a few hours ago, I'd looked for help, but the lot was deserted, save for a single pickup truck far in the corner. When I glanced back at that moment, the trailing car was gone, but it reappeared less than a mile down the road, its headlights flickering into view like a ghost coming back from the darkness. I forced myself to breathe deep and keep my hands loose. Panic was the enemy now. I needed a plan. The next exit was still some distance ahead, a small cluster of houses and a 24-hour diner that might still be open. If I could make it there, maybe someone could help. Or at least I wouldn't be alone. I reached down to check my phone again. No signal. The screen stubbornly read no service. The only thing connected was the intermittent satellite radio, which had long since given up the ghost. I flicked on my hazard lights for a stretch, thinking that maybe flashing the brakes would signal to the tailing driver that I knew I was being followed. Nothing changed. The car remained glued to my back bumper, the headlights glaring like twin eyes in the night. Earlier, I had tried to lose them in a series of turns through a small network of back roads. I'd taken a sharp left off the highway, then 2 quick rights, weaving through trees and passing silent mailboxes. But every time I glanced behind, there was that car, not just close but the same distance, matching my moves perfectly. It was no coincidence. My mind raced. Who could it be? I didn't know anyone who would want to follow me like this. No recent fights, no arguments, no one who'd been hostile or threatening. I thought about my partner, but this wasn't the way they behave. Not like this. My eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror again, and something caught my attention, a license plate. It was hard to make out in the dark, but I could swear it was a generic, unbranded plate, maybe a dealer's plate or temporary tag. The edges were dirty, the numbers smudged. Probably intentional. I swallowed hard. Whoever was behind me wasn't trying to be identified. The road curved ahead, and I took it a little faster than before, hoping to stretch the distance or throw the car off balance. For a moment, I thought I might succeed. The headlights dimmed slightly, then brightened again, settling back into place. That's when the panic hit full force. I saw the car's brake lights flash twice, then the driver hit the gas and pulled dangerously close, almost brushing my rear bumper. My heart slammed against my ribs. I slammed on my own brakes, but the car maintained its proximity, adjusting instantly. The situation had escalated. What did they want? Was this a prank? A robbery? Or something worse? I scanned the horizon for any signs of help, a gas station, a police car, a well-lit intersection, anything. But the highway was still just a ribbon of black, empty and silent. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, trying to think. Driving faster wasn't working. Slowing down wasn't either. I needed to outsmart whoever was behind me. Suddenly, I remembered. A rest area. About 3 miles back. I could pull into it, hoping for a witness or someone who could hear me if I screamed. If the car followed me there, at least someone else might see it. I blinked hard and turned around. No, not a full turn, just a loop, back onto the highway going the other way. I pressed the accelerator and floored it. The car behind me instantly followed. We were retracing our route. The headlights behind me were more than just following, they were hunting. As I neared the rest area entrance, a dim amber glow seeped over the asphalt. I swerved in and parked under a flickering street lamp. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone and tried to dial emergency services. The signal was gone again. The car slowed as it approached the rest area but didn't stop. The driver's side window rolled down a crack, and a shadowy figure leaned out, voice low but audible through the glass. "Hey," the voice said, calm but firm. "Are you lost? Need some help?" I didn't believe it. This was no offer of help. "No," I said, voice shaking. "Please leave me alone." The figure laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You can't shake me. Not tonight." I locked the doors and started the engine, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. I pressed the accelerator and pulled back onto the highway, determined to put distance between us. The chase was far from over. Hours ago, when this started, I thought maybe it was just bad luck, a coincidence. Now, I knew better. Someone was deliberately following me, matching every stop and turn, and I had no idea why or what they planned to do next. The night felt colder somehow, emptier, as I drove on into the unknown. The headlights glared behind me, still always there, never fading. And I knew I wasn't going to get away without a fight. The hum of the engine and the steady tick of the speedometer were the only sounds inside the car. I clenched the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. The highway was deserted, the rest stops like ghost towns. My phone's battery was almost gone, the signal lost the moment I left the last town behind. I tried calling for help earlier, but there was nothing. Just the unbroken black of the road ahead and the unwavering presence behind me. I felt the sweat bead at my hairline despite the cool night air. My mind raced, running through every option, every possible explanation. But the truth settled like a stone in my gut. Someone was following me. Not by chance, not by coincidence. Intentional. Precise. Calculated. I had to do something. But what? I thought about pulling over, maybe confronting whoever was behind me. But the memory of those two steady headlights watching me, matching my every move so perfectly, what if they were waiting for me to stop? The thought curled cold fingers around my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a driver returning from the same event, heading the same way. But the hours that had passed, the perfect mimicry of my route, the eerie constancy, it didn't add up. I decided to take a new approach. Instead of the highway, I would veer onto a smaller road, one less traveled. If the car really was following me, maybe it would reveal itself. Or maybe it would disappear. The exit came up faster than I expected, a narrow turn that led into the shadows of dense woods and forgotten farms. The pavement was cracked and uneven, the street lights sparse and flickering. I took the turn sharply, heart pounding. Glancing back, the headlights were still there, exactly where they had been on the highway. I blinked, disbelief washing over me. How could they have followed me so seamlessly onto this back road? I pushed the accelerator harder, weaving through the winding curves, hoping to lose the tail. The headlights stayed behind me, unwavering. Not a single blink, not a single falter. Panic rose in my chest. This wasn't just some coincidence or a lost driver. Whoever was behind me was deliberate, methodical, and dangerous. I considered calling the police again, but the lack of signal made that impossible. I thought of pulling into a gas station or a populated area, but the nearest town was miles away, and the highway was the only direct route back. A sudden thought struck me. Maybe if I stopped completely, the car would reveal itself. I slowed to a crawl, then came to a full stop on the side of the road, the engine idling softly. The night was silent except for the sounds of bugs and the rustling of leaves. My breath hitched as I watched the rearview mirror. The car stopped too, a few yards behind me. The headlights didn't flash or flash their lights in any signal. The vehicle stayed still, engine quiet. I sat frozen, heart hammering. Minutes passed like hours. Then, a single figure stepped out of the car, illuminated faintly by the pale light of a distant street lamp. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered. His presence was unsettling, not because of what he did, but because of the weight of his silence. I unlocked the doors and reached under the seat, fingers closing around the pepper spray I'd bought last week for just such an uneasy feeling. The man started walking toward my car, slow and steady. "Hey!" I called out, voice trembling but loud enough to reach him. "What do you want?" He paused, his face unreadable. Then he raised a hand, empty, raised in a gesture that could have been surrender or a request to stop. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice low but clear. "I've been following you because I think you're in danger." My eyes narrowed. "What? What danger?" He took a cautious step closer. "You don't know me, but I saw someone watching you at the last rest stop, the one before this road. I thought maybe you didn't notice. I followed to make sure you were safe." I swallowed hard, skepticism warring with relief. "Why didn't you just come up to me earlier? Why follow me for hours?" "Because I wasn't sure if you'd trust me," he admitted. "I didn't want to scare you off or put you in more danger. I thought if I stayed close, I could protect you, or at least keep an eye out." The story seemed plausible, but I wasn't convinced. I had been alone for hours, watched and harassed by a faceless driver. Now this man appeared, claiming he was my protector. It felt like something out of a bad movie. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, voice steady now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I found this in my car. It was left on the seat, your name and address. I think someone wants to find you, and I'm trying to stop it." I took the paper, hand shaking. The handwriting was crude but unmistakable, my name, address, and a time in the morning. A chill ran through me. Someone had been watching me longer than I realized. "Who are you?" I asked again. "Name's Mark," he said. "I work security for a nearby facility. I noticed the car following you after you stopped at the gas station. I tried to get you to notice me, to trust me. I'm sorry it took this long." I looked back at the empty road behind us, then at Mark. The headlights were gone. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of hope. But the note in my hand reminded me that the night was far from over. "Can you get me somewhere safe?" I asked. Mark nodded. "Come on. I know a place nearby, and I'll stay with you until you're safe." I unlocked my door and climbed out, the night air cool against my skin. For the first time, I wasn't alone. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me, not completely. As we walked toward his car, I glanced back down the road one last time. The highway was empty, silent, but the darkness felt heavier now, like something was still waiting out there. I just hoped I wasn't wrong. Story 2, City in Darkness, Isolation Amid Collapse. The blackout struck just after sundown, when the city had already started to hum with its usual restless energy. I fumbled for the flashlight in the top drawer, the one I kept for emergencies, and clicked it on. Its narrow beam cut through the dark corners of my apartment, but it did nothing to ease the tight knot forming in my stomach. The city was dark. Not just my building, or my street, but everything I could see from my window. No lights from the skyscrapers across the river, no blinking signs, no glowing apartments. I reached for my phone. No signal. Not even a flicker. That's when I realized this wasn't just a blackout, it was a collapse. I turned on the radio, hoping for any emergency broadcast, but the static was all I got. I was alone. I had moved into this building less than 6 months ago, a temporary refuge while I looked for something more permanent. The apartment was small but comfortable, with a decent view of the city skyline. I thought I knew my neighbors well enough, or at least enough to exchange casual greetings in the elevator or the lobby. But I had never spent much time around them beyond those brief interactions, and now I wondered if I was anything more than a stranger trapped in a glass box. The power outage felt like a sudden severing of the city's pulse. Without electricity, the streets would grow dangerous quickly. The news had been full of reports about protests and riots escalating over the past few weeks. I tried to stay out of it, believing I could ride out the unrest inside my apartment, but now I wasn't so certain. I locked the front door carefully, double-checking the deadbolt. The building's hallway lights were dead, a dark tunnel beyond my door. I could hear distant noises, voices shouting, a low rumble of something heavy moving in the streets. It sounded close. Too close. My first instinct was to check on my neighbors. There were a handful of them on the floor, Mrs. Ellis across the hall, an elderly woman who always smiled politely but rarely spoke. Down the hall, the Martinez family with their 2 kids and a dog. And then there was the man who lived next to me, Daniel. He was quiet, kept to himself, but he'd helped me once fix the jammed elevator door. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the hallway walls cold and unforgiving. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing briefly on the closed doors. I elbowed Mrs. Ellis's door and called her name softly. No answer. I tried the Martinez apartment next. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed the door open and called out again. Hello? Is anyone here? The place was empty. The smell of cooking hung faintly in the air, but no movement. The lights might be out, but the city wasn't so quiet that I would confuse an empty apartment for a safe one. I closed the door gently and moved on to Daniel's. I knocked firmly. Daniel? It's me. The power's out, are you okay? The door creaked open just a crack, and a pair of sharp eyes peered out. Daniel's face was pale but composed. "Yeah, I'm fine." "You?" "I'm fine," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Have you heard anything?" "Only what you can hear from up here," he said, stepping back to let me in. The apartment was darker than mine, sparse and neat. "You want some water?" "I've got a small supply." I nodded and stepped inside. The place smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic, like dried blood or old rust. I tried not to think about it. Daniel handed me a bottle of water. "I've been watching the news on my laptop, but it died a while ago. The city's a mess out there. Looting, fires, people turning on each other. Do you think it's going to get worse?" He shrugged. "Hard to say. But we can't just wait for help. We need to be ready for anything." I looked around his apartment, noticing the small stack of canned goods on the counter, a first aid kit on the table, and a baseball bat leaning near the door. Daniel was no stranger to trouble, it seemed. "Have you talked to anyone else?" I asked cautiously. He shook his head. "No one answers. People are afraid. And after what I've seen, I don't blame them." "What have you seen?" He hesitated, then said, "Last week, a group of guys broke into the building's storage room. They were looking for supplies, weapons, anything they could get their hands on. I tried to stop them. They didn't like that." I swallowed hard. "Did they hurt you?" "Not this time. But I'm not sure everyone in the building will be so lucky." The words hung in the air like a warning. I felt an icy thread of fear weaving through my chest. I left Daniel's apartment with a new urgency. Whoever those men were, the threat was already inside the building. I needed to know who else I could trust, and who I'd have to watch carefully. Back in my apartment, I locked the door again and moved to the window. The city below was chaotic. Fires burned in the distance, their flickering light casting ominous shadows on the buildings. I could hear the occasional crash of breaking glass, the shout of angry voices, and the sharp report of something heavy hitting pavement. The phone was useless. The electricity was out. The city was breaking down. I felt the heavy weight of isolation settle over me. Alone, trapped, and surrounded by neighbors who all hid something behind their closed doors. I wasn't sure how long I could last. But I knew one thing for now: survival meant watching. Watching everyone. Because in a city unraveling at the seams, the greatest danger wasn't the darkness outside, but the secrets lurking within. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, thick enough to suffocate any attempt at calm. I tried the phone again. Still nothing. No bars, no calls, no messages. I felt a wave of panic rise but shoved it down. Panic didn't help me. I needed to think. The blackout had started hours ago. When the power cut out, my first thought was a grid failure, maybe a storm. But the absence of any communication, the silence spilling from every direction, told me something else was happening. Something far worse. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my flashlight beam bouncing off the peeling paint on the wall. The emergency radio was useless, just static and occasional bursts of garbled noise. The city was cut off, and I was cut off, alone in this tall box of concrete and glass. But I wasn't really alone. I had neighbors. The people who lived on my floor, above, and below. I realized I didn't even know their names. I had exchanged polite nods in the elevator, brief hellos in the lobby, but never anything deeper. Now, trapped, I needed to find something, someone I could trust. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight and pushed open the apartment door. The hallway was pitch black, the emergency lights dead. I clicked the flashlight on and stepped out, the beam slicing through the darkness. The building smelled like stale air and faint dust, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of settling metal. I knew the stairwell had its own emergency lighting, but given the blackout, I wasn't taking chances. I pressed the elevator button. Nothing. The panel was dark, unresponsive. The elevators were dead. Stairs it was. I descended to the floor below, trying the doors of the apartments as I went. Locked. I didn't expect otherwise. I knocked lightly on the first door. Nothing. The second door, same. The third door opened just a crack before slamming shut. A face peeked out, narrow eyes, a frown, and then the door closed with a bang. It was clear no one wanted visitors. On the fourth floor, I hesitated outside apartment 407. I had heard muffled voices here before, and usually, it was the loudest door on the floor. I knocked, louder this time. After a long pause, the door opened halfway. A man's face appeared, illuminated only by the faint glow from a candle inside. His eyes were tired, wary. He was in his early 40s, unshaven, wearing a faded sweatshirt. "Can I come in?" I asked. He looked me over, then nodded slowly and opened the door wider. "You're from 408? "Yeah. Power's out everywhere. The city's unstable." He gestured me inside. "Name's Derek." "You're right. Something's going on. You hear the sirens earlier?" I nodded. "Civil unrest, right?" The news was talking about protests and riots downtown. "More than that," Derek said, pulling a chair towards a small table. "I think the blackout is tied to it. No power means no cameras, no communications. People are using it to move in. Or move out. I'm not sure which yet." I sat down, feeling the weight of his words settle in. "You've been here the whole time?" "Trying to," he said. "But I can hear things outside. Doors banging. Shouting. People desperate for supplies or safety or something worse." I glanced toward the window, the city still a black void beyond. "Have you talked to any other neighbors?" Derek shook his head. "Most of them keep to themselves. I heard someone screaming earlier from 2 floors down. Sounded like trouble. No way to know for sure." I swallowed hard. The image of isolated apartments, all locked tight against the darkness outside, made the building feel like a cage. "Do you have supplies?" I asked. "Just enough for a day or two," Derek said. "Not sure how long this will last." We sat in silence, the candle flickering between us. I knew I had to make a decision. Staying put was as dangerous as stepping out. I needed to understand what was happening in the building, what the people around me were hiding. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed down the hallway, metal scraping against concrete. We both froze. Derek dimmed the candle and moved toward the door, peering through the peephole. I held my breath. A shadow passed by. Heavy footsteps echoed away. "Someone's moving through the halls," Derek whispered. "Should we lock the door?" I asked. "We should have from the start," he said, sliding the deadbolt into place. The feeling of being trapped grew. But who was outside? Friend, foe, or worse? I spent the next half hour talking with Derek, piecing together what little we knew. Others were hoarding supplies, rumors of fights breaking out. Some neighbors had boarded their doors from the inside. The unrest wasn't just outside the building, it was seeping in. When I finally left Derek's apartment, I moved quietly back to mine, the flashlight beam steady but my heart pounding. I tried one more door on my floor, 410, the apartment of a woman I'd seen occasionally in the lobby, young, with a kind smile. I knocked. No answer. I tried again, louder. Then, from inside, I heard a slow, deliberate click. The door unlocked, and it creaked open a few inches. A woman's face appeared, pale and strained. Her eyes darted nervously. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice low. "I'm your neighbor, from 408. Power's out, and I'm checking on everyone." She hesitated, then stepped aside. I entered. The apartment was dimly lit by a handful of candles. She motioned me to sit. "I'm Sophie," she said. "I've been trying to keep to myself, but I think everyone's scared. Do you know what's happening outside?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just rumors. Some say gangs are taking over the streets. Others say the police have vanished. I don't know what to believe." I felt the weight of her fear, but something else too, a flicker of something hidden behind her eyes. "Have you noticed anything strange in the building?" I asked. Sophie looked away. "No. Just noises sometimes. Doors closing, footsteps. But I tell myself it's nothing." I didn't press further. Trust was fragile here, and I couldn't afford to break it. I thanked her and left, stepping back into the dark hallway. The building had become a labyrinth of secrets and suspicion. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and sat, the flashlight now dimming. The city outside was silent but not still. The unrest was closing in, inch by inch. And every neighbor I tried to trust seemed to be hiding something dangerous. I wasn't sure how much longer I could last in this building, or if I'd make it through the night. I woke to the dull ache of unease gnawing at my temples. After last night's tense encounter with Mrs. Calderon, I knew trusting my neighbors was a gamble I couldn't afford to lose. Yet, isolation was its own kind of terror. I flipped on my flashlight and peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, as always. I debated whether to go down to the lobby, to see if anyone was moving, but part of me feared what I might find, or who I might find, in the dimness below. The city's unrest wasn't confined to news reports anymore. I'd heard whispers through the thin walls, fragments of shouting, the distant rattle of debris being thrown, the low murmur of voices arguing in the shadows. The blackout had unleashed something raw and unpredictable. I needed answers. I needed allies. I decided to visit Mr. Singh on the floor below. He'd always been quiet, the kind of man who kept to himself, tending to his orchids by the window during the day. Before the blackout, I'd never spoken to him beyond a nod in the elevator. But now, even the briefest human connection felt like a lifeline. I grabbed the flashlight and padded to the door. A quick knock, soft but deliberate. The door opened before I could even finish the second rap. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to check in, see how you're holding up." Mr. Singh's eyes flicked to the beam of my flashlight and back. He was older than I remembered, his face lined with worry. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His apartment was dim but lived in, the smell of damp earth and old paper filling the small space. The orchids were wilting, leaves browned and curling. He motioned me to a worn armchair near the window. "Not much water these days," he said quietly. "I've been rationing what I have left." I nodded. "Same here. The cities, it's getting worse out there." He sighed, rubbing his chin. "I heard the protests turned into riots, fires near the outskirts. Police are stretched thin. Food supplies are running low in some neighborhoods." I glanced at the window. The city was a black void beyond the faint outline of distant buildings. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" Heard anything from the other floors? Mr. Singh hesitated. There's been movement. I think some people might be using the blackout as cover. I found a broken lock on the floor above me, but I don't know who it belongs to. My stomach flipped. A broken lock meant someone had been inside a neighbor's apartment without permission. Property theft was one thing. In times like these, it could escalate. Did you tell anyone? No. Who would I tell? The police are nowhere. I thought maybe you knew. I shook my head. No one to trust yet. We shared a glance heavy with unspoken fears. I have a radio, he said suddenly, battery-powered. I can tune into some emergency channels. Maybe it'll help us understand what's really happening. I felt a spark of hope. Can I see it? He went to a cluttered shelf and brought out a small, battered device. It crackled to life with static, then a shaky voice cutting through. To all residents, maintain safety. Curfews enforced in all districts. Avoid travel unless necessary. The broadcast was fragmented, but the underlying message was clear. Chaos was spreading. Do you think the curfew will hold? I asked. Mr. Singh shrugged. In this city? It's hard to say. People are scared, and scared people do unpredictable things. That night, I lay awake, the radio's intermittent signal like a lifeline amid the darkness. The thought of that broken lock dragged me back to the uneasy truth. The enemy wasn't out there in the streets, it was inside the building, inside the walls. The next morning, the hallway was still silent and empty. I didn't expect it to be any different, but a sudden noise made me freeze, a soft, deliberate shuffle from the floor above. Instinctively, I moved toward the door and pressed my ear against it. Footsteps paced back and forth, slow and deliberate. Then a faint knock, not at my door, but at the neighbors across the hall. I debated calling out, but the fear of exposing myself to danger kept me silent. Later, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature, just a warning scrawled in shaky handwriting. Beware those who say they protect. Not all who knock mean help. My pulse quickened. Was it a warning or a threat? And who had left it? I thought back to the neighbors I had seen in the elevator, the young couple with the anxious smiles, the burly man who always left for work too early to be real, the quiet woman who never looked up when I passed. Each of them could be a friend or a threat. The building had become a microcosm of the city's unraveling, a place where facades cracked and secrets clawed their way to the surface. I spent the rest of the day watching, listening. The silence was deceptive. Behind locked doors, people were shifting, hiding pieces of themselves that no one should have to reveal. I heard muffled arguments, the slam of something heavy, footsteps hurried and hushed. By evening, I was certain that staying alone was no longer an option. But reaching out meant risking everything. I returned to Mr. Singh's apartment, hoping for some semblance of alliance. Instead, I found his door slightly ajar, the orchids overturned and soil scattered across the floor. Mr. Singh? I called out, my voice catching in my throat. No answer. Fear bloomed in my chest. Had someone come for him? Was he hiding? Or worse? I stepped inside cautiously, flashlight sweeping over the room. The radio lay on the floor, its batteries dead. A sudden sound made me spin around, a shadow slipping through the hallway. Without thinking, I chased after it, heart pounding, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The figure darted ahead, moving with purpose, then disappeared into the stairwell. I hesitated. The stairs creaked under my weight as I followed, each step echoing louder than before. At the next floor, I stopped, breath ragged. The corridor was empty again, but the broken lock Mr. Singh had mentioned glinted faintly in the flashlight's beam. Someone was here. Someone dangerous. I backed away slowly, the sense of being hunted sinking deep. The city's chaos was closing in, and I was trapped in the eye of a storm that had no mercy. Trust was a luxury I no longer had. And survival meant uncovering the truth behind the locked doors, even if it tore the building and my sanity apart. By the time the third day of blackout rolled around, the initial shock had worn off. I had tried to reach out to my neighbors before, knocking door to door, trying to establish some kind of alliance or community, but each encounter left me more unsettled. The man on the fifth floor, Mr. Green, who usually wore a calm smile in the elevator, had shut the door in my face when I asked if he needed supplies. The woman across the hall, Lisa, had invited me in for coffee the first night, but when I looked around her apartment, I noticed multiple locks on the inside of her doors and a handful of knives carefully arranged on the kitchen counter. I hadn't stayed long. I no longer trusted casual kindness. It felt like a performance. Everyone was hiding something, and that something could be dangerous. Today, I decided I couldn't sit and wait any longer. I needed to get food. The building's emergency storage was sparse and had been picked clean by the third day. I had a few cans left, but I couldn't live on canned beans and stale crackers forever. I had to make a run to the corner store downstairs. The stairwells were dark and smelled of damp concrete, but the elevator was out of the question. The moment I stepped into the hallway, shadows moved, and every sound echoed in the silence like a warning. Near my door, I spotted a note taped under the peephole. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Don't trust the ones who smile. They watch. That was new. I didn't know who put it there, but the message hit like a punch. I stuffed it in my pocket, grabbed my flashlight and a makeshift weapon, a wrench from the kitchen drawer, and slipped out. The corridors were empty except for the occasional flicker of movement behind cracked doors. As I made my way down to the lobby, I noticed that the mailboxes were pried open, their contents strewn across the floor. People were unlocking secrets here too, it seemed. The lobby was a cavernous space of shadows and silence. The main glass doors were locked electronically, but I'd seen the maintenance room on the side with a mechanical override. I found it and spent what felt like an eternity fiddling with the old switch until I heard the satisfying click of the lock. I slipped outside into the street. The city was no less menacing than from my window. Broken windows, overturned cars, graffiti that looked less like art and more like threats. A group of figures clustered near a boarded-up newsstand, arguing in low voices. I kept my head down, flashlight off, and tried to look like I belonged. The store was a block away, just a small convenience shop, but it was a vital lifeline. As I approached, I noticed the front door was shattered and the shelves inside were nearly bare. Someone had been here long before me. I debated whether to turn back, but hunger and desperation pushed me forward. Inside, I scavenged what I could find: packets of jerky, some granola bars, bottled water. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going for a few days. On my way out, I heard voices coming from the alley beside the store. I froze. Two people were arguing, their voices low but heated. "I told you, we can't trust anyone from the tower," one said. "You don't know that. I've seen them act normal. They might have food, maybe help." Help? They just watch. They're waiting for the right moment. I edged away, heart pounding. The people in my building, my neighbors, were not innocent bystanders. They were wary, dangerous. The city's unrest had spilled inside these walls. When I got back to the building, I took a different route, backstairs instead of the main corridor. The smell of stale smoke and sweat hit me as I passed one door half open. Peering in, I saw a disheveled man counting pills from a bottle, glancing nervously over his shoulder. He looked like he'd been living on anxiety and whatever meds he could find. "Hey," I whispered, hoping to start a conversation. He jumped, tight and defensive. "Don't want any trouble," he said. "Me neither," I said. "Just trying to survive." He nodded, then locked the door behind me. I didn't press further. Back in my apartment, I fortified the door again, wedging the wrench under the handle and stacking a chair behind it. My phone was still dead. No signal, no messages. The only contact I had was the occasional shout or bang from the hall. I sat down, exhausted but restless. I remembered the note taped to my door, and the voices in the alley, and I wondered how many secrets my neighbors were hiding. Were they scared, like me? Were they planning something worse? Survival had turned everyone into something unrecognizable beyond neighborly smiles or casual greetings. A sharp knock on my door jolted me out of my thoughts. I froze, the wrench in my hand suddenly heavier. "Open up," a voice said. It was low, firm, and unfamiliar. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Friend. I'm from downstairs. We need to talk." I hesitated. Did I have any friends left in this building? Or was this another trap? My heartbeat spiked. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "Because I can help. But you have to open the door." I glanced through the peephole. No one there. Just a shadow. I backed away slowly, wrench raised. "Please," the voice said. "Nobody's coming for you except us. We want to protect you." I sat down, closed the door, and leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. The city outside was a powder keg, and the building I thought was a refuge was at its center. Every neighbor I tried to trust was a question mark, and every question mark felt like a threat. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up, but one thing was clear: survival wasn't just about food or light. It was about who you decided to trust, and in this darkness, trust might be the most dangerous gamble of all. The silence was heavy, thicker than I expected in a city of millions. I thought back to the last conversation I had with Marla, the woman 2 floors down. She'd seemed sympathetic, worried even, but there had been something off in her tone when she mentioned the protests spreading from the downtown area, something like a veiled warning. I hadn't seen her since the blackout, though. The hallway was still and cold, the emergency lights on the stairwell flickering weakly. I pressed the call button for the elevator, but it groaned downstairs, too slow, too loud, and then stopped altogether. I cursed under my breath and decided the stairs were better. The building was old enough that the fire exit stairwell wasn't locked on the inside. As I stepped down from my floor, the faint smell of smoke caught my attention. It was subtle, but it was definitely there. My heart jumped. Smoke in a building without power? That could mean a fire, or worse, someone setting something on purpose. At the second floor landing, I saw a door slightly ajar. It was Mr. Hernandez's apartment, the quiet man with the framed photos of his grandchildren on the wall by the elevator. I'd never really talked to him, but now I hesitated. Normally, I wouldn't pry, but with the blackout and unrest, privacy felt like a luxury we no longer had. I pushed the door open a little more and called softly, "Mr. Hernandez? Are you all right?" No answer. The smell of smoke was stronger here. I flicked on the flashlight and stepped inside. The apartment was a mess, cushions torn from the couch, papers scattered across the floor, and a faint trail of something dark smeared on the carpet. My throat tightened as I noticed the window was open, curtains billowing in a cold breeze. It was the only light source, pale and indistinct. I checked the small kitchen. No sign of fire, but the stove was still on, gas leaking. I shut it off quickly, heart pounding, and searched the room again. Then I heard it, a faint groan from the bedroom. I crept toward the door and pushed it open, the beam of my flashlight landing on Mr. Hernandez lying on the floor, his face pale. He was conscious but shaky, clutching his side. "Help," he whispered. "There's people. They broke in, took the TV, the safe." I knelt beside him, trying to keep calm. "What happened? Who did this?" He shook his head weakly. "Don't know. Masked, from the street protests, I think. They're moving through the building. Said anyone cooperating would be fine. Told me to stay silent." My mind raced. The protests weren't just outside anymore. They'd already infiltrated this building. Mr. Hernandez's eyes flicked to the window. "You need to lock your door. Don't trust anyone. They're coming." I nodded, helped him sit up, and called the emergency number on my phone. Of course, there was no signal. I half carried him to the stairwell and helped him sit against the wall. "I'll get you help," I said, though I wasn't sure from where. I went back upstairs, locking his door behind me, and retreated to my apartment. The city outside my window was dark but alive. Faint shouts and pounding sounds echoed in the distance. Somewhere, a window smashed. The blackout had stripped away our safety, and now the city was turning on itself. I didn't want to believe it, but every neighbor I thought I could turn to had secrets they were hiding. Marla's vague warnings, the way the new tenant on the 5th floor avoided eye contact, even the building manager's sudden insistence that no one leave the premises, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see. My phone buzzed suddenly in the darkness. I fumbled to grab it, but the screen stayed stubbornly dead. Then came a soft knock at the door. Frozen, I stared at the doorknob barely turning. "Who is it?" I demanded. A voice, low and careful, answered, "It's me, Carlos. From the 7th floor. I heard about Mr. Hernandez. I can help." Carlos. I barely knew him beyond nodding in the hall. His reputation was mixed. Some said he kept to himself, others whispered about his past run-ins with the law. Was he an ally or another threat? I hesitated but unlocked the door a crack. "What do you want?" "Safe haven," he said quietly. "I've got supplies and a plan to get us through the night. But I need your help." I looked past him, into the dimly lit hallway. The protests were getting closer, and I wasn't sure if Carlos was the answer or the danger. I stepped back inside and locked the door. "We're going to have to trust each other," he said, voice steady. "Because out there, no one else will." I didn't want to trust him, or anyone. But with the city unraveling and the building turning hostile, maybe I didn't have a choice. The night was far from over, and I knew the secrets hidden behind every door were shadows darker than any blackout. I took a deep breath and motioned for Carlos to come in. As the door closed behind him, I wondered just how deep the darkness went. Carlos stepped inside, the faint glow of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. "First rule," he whispered, "no sudden moves. We need to stay silent and stick close." I nodded, heart pounding, as the walls seemed to close in, hiding threats we couldn't yet see. Story 3, Vanished in Plain Sight, Discovering a Partner's Dark Secret. I had never been the type of person to snoop through someone else's things. It started with a misplaced key. I was looking for the spare screwdriver, which Marcus had promised he'd fix the squeaky cabinet door with last week. When I opened the small cabinet beneath the sink, a slim, worn leather-bound journal slipped out with a soft thud. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't the kind of thing Marcus would leave lying around, and it certainly wasn't mine. Out of curiosity, I flipped it open. The first words made me freeze. April 3rd, 2005, Emily left today. She told me she couldn't handle the silence anymore, but I know there's more to it. I don't understand why she just vanished. I blinked, heart skipping a beat. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost clinical. I turned to the next page. June 17th, 2007, Jennifer disappeared without a trace. The police found nothing, but I keep their photos on my desk, just in case they come back. My breath caught. The names were unfamiliar, but the tone was chilling. This wasn't a diary about daily life. It was a log, detailed, obsessive, and utterly disturbing. I flipped further. Each entry was a precise account of a relationship ending abruptly, the person simply disappearing, not just breaking up or moving away, but gone like they'd never existed. The dates spanned more than a decade, and every single one detailed a woman I had never heard Marcus mention. I closed the journal, shaking. My mind raced. Was it a morbid fantasy? Some kind of elaborate fiction? But the dates matched his past relationships, or at least what little he told me. I knew Marcus had dated before me, but the idea that so many women had vanished after being with him was impossible to ignore. I peeked at the last entry. March 12, 2019, Hannah stopped answering my calls. I'm starting to think she's gone too, but I'll wait. I have to be patient. Hannah. That was the woman Marcus met right before me. The woman who supposedly moved out of town for work. I had always thought that was the reason she left so abruptly. The room began to spin. How could I have missed these red flags? The careful way Marcus kept this journal, hidden and private. The way he had explained his past relationships to me in vague, half-truths. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath me was crumbling. I knew I needed answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched Marcus from across the room. He was sitting on the couch, absorbed in some sports highlight on TV, oblivious to the storm inside me. When he looked up and caught my gaze, he smiled, a familiar, warm smile that had always been my anchor. But now I saw the cracks beneath it. "Everything okay?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." But the truth was, I was terrified. I wanted to believe he was innocent, that the journal was some sick joke or a twisted piece of his past he tried to leave behind. Yet the words haunted me. The disappearances, the obsession, the cold precision in his handwriting, it was all too real. Over the next few days, I found myself avoiding Marcus, watching him more closely when he wasn't looking. I checked our apartment for anything else out of place, hidden cameras, strange notes, anything. I even looked up the names in the journal. None of the women were reported missing. No news articles, no police records, nothing. It was as if they had all simply ceased to exist. I confronted Marcus once, trying to shake the feeling that I was losing my mind. I asked about the previous women he dated. He was evasive, brushing off my questions with practiced ease. His answers were always calm but vague, like he was carefully choosing what to reveal. "Why don't you tell me more about them?" I had said one evening, sitting across from him at the dinner table. He shrugged. "They're all just part of my past. I don't see the point in digging them up." But I had already dug too deep. The next day, I found the journal missing. I searched the apartment, but it was gone, no sign of it anywhere. I even wondered if I had imagined it, but the memory was too vivid, too terrifying to dismiss. That night, Marcus pressed his hand over mine, his touch gentle but insistent. "You've been distant," he said softly. "Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell him everything, to confess the fear gnawing inside me, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and smiled weakly. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the question echoing in my mind, how long before I became his next entry? The dawn slipped through the curtains, casting pale light across the room, but sleep eluded me. Each creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind felt amplified, as if the shadows themselves were watching. I thought of the journal again, the way the ink seemed to shimmer, the names fading only to be replaced by new ones in a hurried scrawl. Was it a curse? A warning? Or something far worse, a cycle that continued with no end? Marcus stood beside me, oblivious to the growing dread inside me. I traced the lines of his face, desperately seeking reassurance, but found only the stark truth. I was alone in this. And the next name, I feared, was already written. I closed the journal and sat back, my mind racing. I told myself to breathe, to think clearly. I knew Marcus better than anyone. Or so I thought. He was always calm, charming, meticulous. Our marriage was perfect, or at least, what I believed was perfect. I tried to recall if there had been any signs, any cracks I'd missed. There was that time he disappeared for a weekend without explanation, saying he was on a work trip, but there were no emails, no calls, no meetings on his calendar. I'd pushed the suspicion away then, but now those memories gnawed at me. I looked back at the journal. The entries were dated from years ago, but the handwriting was the same as the one I recognized from the letters Marcus wrote me when we first started dating. I hadn't noticed the similarity before because I'd never seen his handwriting up close, but now that I compared them, there was no doubt. I flipped to the last few pages. The most recent entry was dated 6 months ago. I read quietly. March 12, 2023. Sarah hasn't been seen for 3 days. She said she was going to visit her sister but never made it. I keep telling myself she'll come back, but the silence is deafening. I'm starting to doubt myself. Sarah. The name didn't ring a bell initially, but then it hit me. Sarah was the woman Marcus had mentioned only once, shortly before we met. He said she was a close friend who had suddenly moved away. I closed the journal again. The pieces were fitting together in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. The missing women, the precise observations, the obsessive notes about their disappearances, it wasn't just a coincidence. And if Sarah was his latest, who was next? Could it be me? I forced myself to stand and pace the kitchen. I needed to think logically. What did I really know about Marcus? I remembered the way he always insisted on knowing where I was, who I was with. He said it was because he cared, but now it sounded like control. The late night calls to check in, the sudden mood shifts when I mentioned spending time with friends. I dismissed them as quirks, signs of someone who loved too deeply. But now, I wasn't so sure. I pulled out my phone and opened the contacts list. I searched for Sarah's name. Nothing. There were no recent calls, no texts. I tried searching for the other names mentioned in the journal: Emily, Jennifer, Claire. None of them were in Marcus's phone, or mine. If he was trying to erase these women from his life, he was thorough. My heart pounded as I contemplated my next move. Confronting him now would be dangerous. What if he suspected I knew? What if he was already watching me more closely than ever? I decided to do something else first. I needed proof, something concrete to bring to the police. But how could I find evidence? The journal was damning, but it was just words on a page. I needed more. That afternoon, I went to the local library and searched for news reports on the missing women. Emily, Jennifer, Claire, Sarah each had been reported missing over the years, but their cases had grown cold. The media coverage was sparse. Emily's case from 2005 had been a short article buried in the local paper's archives. Jennifer's disappearance in 2007 barely made the evening news. Claire and Sarah were even less documented. It was as if these women had been deliberately erased. I printed out the articles and brought them home, spreading them across the dining table beside the journal. The pattern was undeniable. I sat there, overwhelmed by fear and disbelief. How could anyone be capable of this? And how could I have missed it? Night fell, and Marcus came home. He was cheerful, as always, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. He kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. I forced a smile and said it was fine. But beneath my calm exterior, I made a decision. I would watch him. I would find out the truth. And if I was going to be next, I would make sure no one else became the next entry in his journal. I sometimes caught him staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Was it suspicion? Possession? Or something darker? That night, I set my phone to record audio in the living room while I pretended to be asleep. I wasn't sure what I hoped to catch, but I needed evidence of whatever he was planning. Hours later, I awoke to the sound of whispering. I strained to listen, but the words were muffled, unintelligible. The footsteps came closer, then stopped just outside the bedroom door. My breath caught. I stayed perfectly still as the door creaked open a fraction. "Are you awake?" Marcus's voice was low, almost a whisper. I didn't answer. He hesitated, then closed the door again. The footsteps retreated, and silence fell. The next morning, I played back the recording. The whisper was too faint to make out clearly, but I heard the words soon repeated several times. My stomach turned. Whatever Marcus was planning wasn't just history. It was happening now. I had to be ready. I started to plan. I made copies of the journal pages and the news articles, hiding them in places only I could access. I changed my daily routines, told my closest friend about my fears without revealing everything. I even considered leaving, but the thought of what Marcus might do if he suspected me was terrifying. And then, one evening, as I was making dinner, Marcus called with a calm, friendly voice that made my skin crawl. "Let's take a weekend trip," he said. "Just the two of us. We need to reconnect." My heart sank. That was how it always started, the invitations, the promises, the charm. And then, the silence. I smiled tightly and said I'd think about it. Because deep down, I knew the question haunting me was no longer if I would become the next entry in his journal, but when. And how much time I had left before the pages closed on my story. For the first time in weeks, I slept without the journal tucked under my pillow. That morning, I left for work with my hands trembling slightly as I locked the front door behind me. Marcus kissed me goodbye like he always did, warm and effortless, but every time I looked at him, my mind flashed back to the journal. Was he watching me, aware of the storm growing inside me? Was he calculating how long it would be before I was gone? I swallowed hard and forced myself to focus on the mundane routine of the office, where the hum of computers and the blur of faces kept me grounded. But at lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The text was brief: "You're asking the wrong questions." No signature, no hint of who sent it. My heart pounded. Was this a threat? A warning? Or someone trying to help? I spent the rest of the day scanning my contacts, thinking about who might be behind the message. The only person who came to mind was Sarah, Marcus's sister, who had mysteriously stopped answering my calls months ago. I remembered how, the first time I met her, she gave me a tight, forced smile, like someone holding back a secret. After work, I decided I had to confront Marcus. I needed answers. If the journal was his, if those entries were about him, I had to know why. I arrived home to find the house quiet except for the soft creak of the floorboards as Marcus moved about. Dinner was awkward. He asked no questions about my day, and I couldn't bring myself to mention the journal out loud. Later, as he settled into his armchair with a book, I stood in the kitchen, my fingers twitching against the counter edge. I finally said it, voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I found the journal." He looked up, his eyes steady and calm, but something in his expression shifted, like a curtain being drawn back for a moment before it snapped shut again. "I figured you would," he said. "Why? Why did you keep it? Who are those women? Why does it feel like you're keeping track of them like trophies?" He closed the book silently. "They weren't trophies. They were mistakes. People I cared about who couldn't handle me. It's not what you think." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt was a cold fist in my chest. "Disappearances aren't mistakes, Marcus. They vanish. The police never find them. You even keep photos of them?" My voice cracked. "What are you hiding?" He stood and walked over to me, his face softening. "I'm not hiding anything from you. Those women were all part of my past, difficult, complicated. I never hurt them. I loved them. But some people can't cope with the truth, and they leave." "The truth?" I echoed. He hesitated. Then, as if deciding to trust me, he said, "I have a condition. It makes relationships hard. I'm not proud of it, but I'm trying. That journal? It was my way of trying to understand myself. To keep track so I could break the cycle." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that my husband was flawed but not dangerous. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Then why keep it hidden? Why not tell me? "Because I was scared you'd leave too," he admitted quietly. "I'm sorry. I thought I could fix myself before you ever had to know." I looked at him, the man I married, the man who had been my safe harbor, now a stranger standing in my kitchen. I didn't know if I was afraid of him or for him. Or for myself. That night, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart pounding. If Marcus was telling the truth, if he was just a man battling his demons, then why did the police reports mention no leads? Why did those women never come back? And if he wasn't dangerous, then who was? By morning, I knew I couldn't just wait and wonder. I had to dig deeper. I had to find out for myself what really happened to those women, and to find out if I was already marked as the next chapter in his tragic history. I dressed quickly, my fingers trembling as I pulled on my jacket. The chill of dawn seeped through the cracked window, but it was nothing compared to the cold knot tightening in my stomach. Somewhere in the tangled threads of Marcus's story, the truth was waiting, hidden, elusive, dangerous. I had to uncover it before it was too late. I grabbed my notebook and phone, the tools that had become extensions of myself over the past weeks. The first step was obvious: revisit the places Marcus had mentioned, the last known locations of the missing women. Each site was a grim marker on the map of this mystery, and I needed to see them with my own eyes, to feel the atmosphere, to unearth anything overlooked. The first stop was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I remembered Marcus's voice faltering when he described it, a place where shadows clung to the walls, where silence was broken only by the scurrying of rats. The air was thick with dust and decay, and as I stepped inside, a shiver ran down my spine. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and I imagined footsteps that never left, echoes of fear that never faded. I scanned the area, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, catching on shards of glass and twisted metal. Nothing immediately stood out, but then I noticed faint scrawlings on a wall, words half washed away by time. I crouched down, brushing away dust to reveal a name: Lena. A chill settled over me. Lena was the first woman to vanish, the one Marcus had spoken about most urgently. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before unlocking it. The text was brief, chilling: "Stop digging. Some stones are better left unturned." My pulse quickened. Whoever was watching me didn't want the truth to come out. But now, more than ever, I was determined to press on. With renewed purpose, I left the warehouse, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I knew this path would be dangerous, but the faces of those lost women haunted my thoughts, pushing me forward. Somewhere in the shadows of this town lay answers, and a darkness I was about to confront head-on. I barely slept that night. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay silent. But I also knew I had to be careful. Marcus didn't strike me as the kind of man who'd react well to confrontation. Beneath the charm and warmth, there was something else, something cold that I was only just beginning to glimpse. I decided to do some digging on my own, hoping to find a thread to pull it without tipping him off. I started with the names from the journal. None of them were local. The entries mentioned different cities, states even, but every disappearance had been unsolved, fading into cold cases with no leads. Curiously, I found a few archived news articles tucked away in online databases, brief mentions of missing women, never linked to Marcus publicly. He had been in each city around the time the women vanished. His job as a traveling consultant accounted for that. The coincidences were too many to ignore. I printed out what I could find and spread them on the kitchen table, feeling the weight of each photo and headline. Marcus arrived home before I finished. He was as casual as ever, smiling and asking about my day. I forced a smile back but felt a lie stick in my throat. He noticed the papers. "What's all this?" he asked, glancing at the printouts. "Just some old news clippings I found online," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was curious if you remembered any of these cases. They're from places you've worked." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he said, "I remember the cases. Tragic, all of them. Terrible for the families involved. Did you know any of the women?" I asked, watching him closely. "No," he replied firmly. "I never met them." I nodded, not wanting to push too hard just yet. Instead, I shifted the conversation. "Marcus, can I ask you something? Something personal?" "Of course." "Have you ever felt like you lose control? Like you don't recognize who you are?" He blinked, surprised by the question. Then he shrugged. "Everyone has moments like that." "Why?" I swallowed hard. "Sometimes I wonder if people hide parts of themselves even from the people closest to them." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's true. Nobody is ever completely transparent." There was a pause, and I felt the room grow colder. I wanted to retreat, to pretend none of this was happening. But I didn't. That night, I watched Marcus carefully. He laughed at the TV shows he liked, cooked dinner with practiced ease, and talked about future plans as if nothing was wrong. But between the cracks, I saw fleeting expressions, brief shadows of something else. Regret. Guilt? Or something darker? I decided to check the house again, searching for anything that might give me more clues. I went back to the cabinet under the sink, where I'd found the journal, but it was empty now. I checked his study, the bedroom, the garage, everywhere. Nothing. Then, in the back of the closet, I found a small, locked box hidden behind some old coats. I didn't have the key, but the lock was cheap. Using a hairpin, I managed to pry it open. Inside were dozens of Polaroid photos, women I recognized from the journal, all smiling or posing with Marcus. Some were candid, others clearly staged. There were a few notes scribbled on the backs, dates, places, little comments like "too nervous," "missed appointment," or "promise to call." I shivered. It was like a sick scrapbook of his past relationships, all the ones that ended in those disappearances. I put the box back, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't just leave it like this, but confronting him felt dangerous. Days passed. I became careful about what I said, how I acted. Marcus didn't bring up the journal or the photos. He seemed to sense something was off, but never asked directly. I started to notice his routine more closely, his late-night phone calls, the times he left the house with odd excuses, the way he always made sure his phone was face down on the table. One evening, I followed him. I kept my distance, watching as he drove out of town and pulled into a parking lot near an old, abandoned building. He met with a woman there, a young woman with a tight smile and eyes that darted nervously. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the tension was palpable. Marcus handed her a small envelope. She took it, hesitated, then left quickly. I stayed in the shadows until Marcus returned to his car, then followed him home. That night, I confronted him quietly. "Who was that woman?" He looked at me, calm but guarded. "Just someone I work with. Nothing to worry about." But the lie was obvious. I knew I was in too deep. Marcus was far from the man I thought I married. And I had no idea how much time I had before I became his next entry in that grim journal. I started planning my next move, desperately trying to find a way out without alerting him. But every step I took only reminded me of how carefully he'd covered his tracks and how little I truly knew about the man I'd called husband. The hardest part was realizing that the person who should have been my protector might be my greatest threat. And the question that haunted me every moment was no longer if, but when. How long before I disappeared too? The air in the kitchen felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. I had to know. I needed something more concrete than a series of entries that read like the ramblings of a man who was trying to make sense of a string of disappearances that all seemed somehow connected to him. The question was, how? Earlier that week, I'd started retracing the names in the journal. Emily, Jennifer, Lisa, women who had vanished. I'd spent hours on missing persons databases, scrolling through news archives and police reports, trying to find any clue, any lead that linked them to Marcus. And then, something surfaced. I found a small article from 2007 about Jennifer's disappearance. The piece mentioned a man seen with her shortly before she vanished. The description, it was eerily similar to Marcus's. My hands trembled as I read on. The article said the police had questioned the man but released him due to lack of evidence. That man was Marcus. It said he had cooperated fully, but the family never believed him. I closed the laptop, the room spinning slightly. I wanted to scream, to yell at him for deceiving me, for hiding this secret life, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not yet. I needed to be sure. That night, Marcus came home later than usual. The house was darker than I remembered it in the morning, and the silence felt oppressive. He greeted me with that same easy smile, the one that used to make me feel safe. Tonight, it felt like a mask. "I made dinner," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. He nodded, dropping his bag by the door. "Thanks. Long day." I watched him closely, noting the way his shoulders hunched slightly, the way his eyes darted whenever I asked a simple question. "Marcus," I said carefully, "do you remember Emily? Jennifer? Lisa?" He blinked, his smile faltering for the briefest moment. "Why do you ask?" I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. "I came across some old things. Names I think you mentioned before." He paused, then exhaled slowly. "Those were a long time ago. I don't like to talk about it." It was the closest he'd come to admitting anything, and my heart pounded in response. "Marcus, if there's something I should know, anything at all, you need to tell me." He looked away, jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might break down, confess everything. But then he straightened, the mask snapping back into place. You're imagining things. Those women, they left for their own reasons. I'm not responsible. The word stung, but there was no anger in his voice, only cold detachment. That terrified me more than any outburst could have. Over the next few days, I kept my distance. I watched him, studied him, everything from the way he answered phone calls to the routes he took on his daily runs. He seemed normal, unimpeachably so, but I knew better. I had the journal, and now the articles, and a creeping sense of dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. Then, last Thursday, I received a message on my phone from an unknown number. Stop looking. You don't know what you're getting into. The message chilled me to my core. Who was watching me? How much did Marcus know about what I'd found? I wanted to confront him, but I was afraid. Afraid that if I did, something worse would happen. At night, I started sleeping with the lights on. I double-checked all the locks, even though Marcus had the keys. Every creak in the house made me jump. The journal became a kind of morbid talisman, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Last Saturday, I decided to follow him. It was a risk, but I needed to see where he went after work to understand why this all felt so wrong. He left the house around 6, as usual. I waited 10 minutes, put on my coat, and slipped out behind him. We drove in silence, him focused on the road, me trying to keep a safe distance. Eventually, he pulled into a small, run-down neighborhood on the edge of town that I'd never been to before. The kind of place where the streetlights flickered and the houses leaned in close, like they were whispering secrets to each other. He stopped in front of an old warehouse. The windows were cracked and dirty, the paint peeling off the metal doors. He looked around, then disappeared inside. My heart hammered in my chest as I circled the block, trying to find a place to park without being seen. I managed to get close enough to the back entrance. It was unlocked. I hesitated. Every horror story I'd ever heard played through my mind, the one about the woman who got too close, the one about the husband who wasn't what he seemed. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of rust. My footsteps echoed as I moved deeper, following the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. And then I saw it. A wall covered in photographs. They were pinned up in neat rows, faces of women I recognized from the journal. Emily, Jennifer, Lisa. Some newer ones I hadn't seen before. Each photo had a date written underneath, some notes, a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the pin. I reached out, trembling, and unfolded one of the papers. It was a list of names, dates, places, details that only someone obsessively tracking could know. Suddenly, a sound behind me made me spin around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, controlled. I wanted to understand," I stammered. He took a step toward me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't calm. It was something darker, something dangerous. "You should have stopped looking a long time ago," he said quietly. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, realizing the nightmare was far from over. This was only the beginning. How long before I became the next entry in his journal? Story 4, Stranded on Silent Highway, Unseen Footprints in Twilight. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the cracked asphalt as I pulled my car off the side of Highway 82. I tried turning the key again, but the car coughed and died entirely. I popped the hood, hoping to spot something obvious, a loose wire, a puddle of leaking fluid, but nothing jumped out at me. The engine block was still warm, which meant I hadn't been stranded for long, but the silence around me was overwhelming. No cars passed by during the 10 minutes I spent fiddling with the engine. No birds sang, no breeze rustled the dry grass alongside the highway. just the faint buzz of distant insects. I climbed back inside and grabbed my phone from the passenger seat. No signal. Not even one bar. I'd crossed into a stretch of road that seemed to have been forgotten by cell towers and GPS satellites alike. I felt a rising panic, the isolation pressing in tighter as the last golden light drained from the sky. I debated my options. I could wait in the car until morning, hoping someone would pass by, or I could try walking to the nearest town. According to the map app I downloaded earlier, the closest settlement was about 6 miles north. In fading light and with an uncertain path, 6 miles felt like a long way. But I wasn't thrilled about sitting here all night either. I grabbed my small backpack, water, a flashlight, some snacks, and locked the car. The air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of dust and sagebrush. I stepped onto the shoulder of the highway and looked north. The road stretched straight and empty, flanked by fields of scrubby grass and low hills. No houses, no power lines, no signs of life. As I started walking, I told myself to stay calm. Keep moving. 6 miles on foot would take maybe 2 hours, and I could catch a ride from someone or find a payphone or something. It was still light enough to see the road clearly, but the shadows were growing longer. After 15 minutes, I stopped to catch my breath at a curve in the road where visibility dropped. I turned around to look at the car. It sat there, lonely and lifeless, its headlights off but the paint gleaming faintly in the twilight. Something near the front tire caught my eye, footprints imprinted in the dirt beside the road. I crouched down to examine them. They were too big and irregular to be from any local animal I recognized. The area was home to coyotes and rabbits, but these prints looked more like human shoes. The pattern was erratic, circling around the front of the car and then doubling back, as if whoever had made them had been pacing or searching. A chill crept through me despite the warmth of the day. Who else would be out here, on this deserted highway, at this time? And why hadn't I heard any sound, no voices, no engines? I pulled out my flashlight and shone it on the ground, tracing the prints carefully. They were fresh, no dust or debris had settled into them yet. The sole pattern was unusual, a mix of deep grooves and scuffed areas, like a worn hiking boot. Whoever had been here was still close. I glanced back down the road toward the north, then south. No movement. Just silence. I stuffed the flashlight back into my pack and climbed into the car. I locked the doors and sat down, heart pounding. I tried to call 911 again. Still no signal. I debated what to do next. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Was someone watching me right now? Had they come to see what I was doing, to see if I was stranded? Was this some kind of setup? The thought felt absurd. Who would intentionally strand a lone traveler here? But the footprints unsettled me. They weren't random. They circled the car like a predator assessing its prey. I pulled out my pocket knife and gripped it tightly. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe someone had stopped to check on me and then left. Maybe it was a hunter or a wanderer passing through. I tried to focus on practical matters. The car was dead, and my phone was useless. I was alone, and night would fall soon. I needed to find help, but I also needed to be cautious. Suddenly, the distant crunch of footsteps on gravel made me freeze. I sat perfectly still, straining to listen. The noise grew louder, deliberate and slow, coming from the south, the direction the footprints had seemed to circle toward. My breath caught in my throat as I debated staying put or running. The car wouldn't start, and the road stretched empty in both directions. The footsteps stopped just out of sight, and a shadow appeared at the edge of the headlights. I couldn't make out much, a silhouette, tall and lean, standing just beyond where the light reached. I reached for the door lock button, fingers numb. The figure shifted slightly, then took a step forward. "Hey," a rough voice called out. No warmth, just a flat tone. "You need some help?" I swallowed hard. This wasn't the friendly roadside assistance I'd hoped for. The man's presence felt heavy, his gaze unnerving even from a distance. "Yeah," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "My car broke down. No signal on my phone. I'm waiting for a tow or something." He laughed quietly, not quite a laugh. "Ain't no tow coming out here anytime soon. You're a long way from anywhere. Maybe you want to come with me? I'm heading back to my place a few miles down the road." Something about the offer didn't sit right. I shook my head. "No thanks. I think I'll wait here." He took another step closer, the beam from his flashlight cutting through the dark. "Suit yourself. But it's gonna get cold out here, and not many cars pass through after dark." I stayed silent. The weight in my chest grew heavier. The man's eyes glinted in the light, calculating, patient. I could feel the tension stretching between us like a taut wire. "Look," I said finally, "I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll be fine here. Someone should pass by soon." He smiled then, a thin, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe not." I locked my doors again and leaned back against the seat, heart hammering. The footsteps retreated, fading into the darkness, but my unease didn't lift. I realized then that I wasn't alone on this deserted highway. And if the footprints circling my car were any indication, whoever had been here before might still be near. I wasn't sure how long I could last waiting for help, if it came at all. All I could do was hold tight and hope that whatever was out there didn't decide to come closer. Night was falling fast, and I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the highway stretching endlessly behind me and the unknown lurking just beyond the edges of my headlights. The sun had slipped completely below the horizon by the time I decided to step out and inspect the footprints more closely. At first glance, they were human barefoot, judging by the rounded toe impressions and the absence of tread marks. But the way they looped and doubled back in jittery, erratic patterns didn't make sense. No person would pace in this way unless they were trying to confuse a tracker or were disoriented. I knelt down to get a better look, shining the light from different angles. The prints ranged in size, some smaller, almost childlike, others larger and whiter. I frowned, glancing back at the dark highway behind me. The road stretched out in both directions, a ribbon of black ribbon edged by dry scrub and the skeletal remains of dead trees. No other cars, no other lights, no signs of movement. And yet, here were these footprints, circling my car as if someone or someone's had been lingering here for a while, watching. My heart beat faster. I pulled out my phone again, hoping maybe a signal would have returned with the night, but the screen stubbornly displayed no service. The battery was down to 30%. I had no way to call for help or even check my location on a map. I stood up and scanned the horizon, thinking about what to do next. Walking 6 miles to the nearest town in the dark felt like a bad idea, especially with these footprints nearby. I had no idea who or what made them. Maybe locals knew the highway well enough to come out here after dark, but the patterns didn't look like casual foot traffic. More like someone circling, waiting, or maybe even stalking. A sudden rustling noise came from the brush just beyond the shoulder. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The rustling stopped as abruptly as it started. I shone the flashlight toward the noise, but saw nothing at first. Then a shadow slipped away between the trees, disappearing into the black. I swallowed hard. There were no wild animals out here large enough to make footprints like those. Coyotes and deer wouldn't leave bare footprints, and I was sure I hadn't imagined them. Someone had been here recently, close enough to circle my car. I didn't want to believe it, but it was the only logical conclusion. Still, There was no sound of voices, footsteps, or a vehicle. Whoever was out there was either hiding or moving carefully, probably watching. The realization sent a cold wave of fear through me. I climbed back into the car and locked the doors, my fingers trembling slightly as I did. The interior felt claustrophobic, but it was safer than outside. I pulled a blanket from the back seat and wrapped it around my shoulders, trying to calm myself. I debated my next move. Waiting here all night meant risking whatever or whoever might still be circling outside. But walking in the dark, alone, without a flashlight, and into territory I didn't know was a gamble too. Then I remembered the emergency kit in the trunk. Maybe there was something useful inside: flares, a reflective triangle, a first aid kit. Anything that could draw attention or help me signal passing drivers in the morning. I unlocked the trunk and lifted it cautiously, flashlight steady in my hand. I rummaged through the kit, finding the usual road trip essentials: a spare tire, jumper cables, a flashlight, thankfully working, and a small flare gun. I loaded a flare into the barrel, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe this could be my way out. Just as I was about to close the trunk, a faint crunch echoed from somewhere behind the car. My breath caught in my throat. I snapped the trunk shut and spun around, pointing the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. I backed slowly to the driver's door, locked it again, and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. The flare gun felt heavy in my lap. It wasn't a weapon, more a last resort signal, but it was something. Anything. Minutes passed, thick and silent except for the faint hum of cicadas in the distance. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye, something reflecting the flashlight beam just beyond the edge of the clearing. A figure. I froze, heart pounding wildly. The figure stood still, watching from the shadows. I couldn't make out any details, just the silhouette of a tall person. "Hello?" I called out, voice shaking. "I'm stranded. Please, I just need help." No response. The figure didn't move. I gripped the flare gun tighter. The rational part of me told me to stay calm. Maybe the person was a good Samaritan who could help. But the instinctive part, the raw, primal part, was screaming at me to lock the doors and drive away if I could. The figure began to move slowly toward the road, staying just inside the tree line. I watched, breath held. I needed to decide: stay put and pray for a passerby, or risk walking to the next town before whoever this was came closer. Suddenly, the figure stopped and turned toward the trees again, disappearing without a sound. I sat back, exhaling slowly. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't ready to make contact yet. But they knew I was here. I pulled out the map I'd printed earlier and tried to focus. The nearest town was still 6 miles away, and it would take me at least 2 hours to walk there, maybe more in the dark. I couldn't see any other cars coming, and I doubted anyone else would be driving this stretch tonight. The only option that felt remotely safe was to stay with the car until first light, then use the flare gun to signal for help. I turned off the engine and rolled up the windows, trying to ignore the uneasy weight of the footsteps circling outside. I kept the flashlight within reach and the flare gun close by as I settled into the seat, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Whoever had made those prints wasn't local wildlife. They were human. And they were nearby. I didn't know if they were watching or waiting, but one thing was clear: I wasn't alone out here on Highway 82. And I wasn't sure if I was going to get out alive. The sun had completely vanished now, swallowed by a thickening sky that was turning a shade of bruised purple. I glanced down at the erratic footprints I'd found earlier, circling the car like a frantic, unsteady halo. They didn't resemble any prints I'd seen before: too large for a dog, too irregular for deer or coyote. What unsettled me most was how they curved back on themselves, sometimes overlapping, as if whoever had made them was pacing or circling the car repeatedly, hesitant yet deliberate. The thought gnawed at me: These weren't animal tracks. I told myself I was safe. The highway was deserted, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but scrub and dry grass that rustled faintly in the wind. But those footprints suggested someone had been nearby. And worse, someone might still be lurking somewhere close. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, though the air was cool and dry, not cold, and tried to steady my breathing. I wasn't the type to panic, but the isolation was starting to crack my composure. My mind flitted back to the map app I'd seen earlier. 6 miles to the nearest town, but walking that at night, alone, with no idea what might be out there. It wasn't a safe option. Not yet. I decided to stay with the car. The highway might be empty now, but maybe if I waited long enough, a passing driver would notice my trouble and stop. I could flash my phone's light, wave my arms, make noise, anything to get attention. But the night was long, and I was alone. About an hour later, I noticed something else. The footprints had shifted. I hadn't seen them move. Of course, no one was visible, but on closer inspection in the dim moonlight, fresh prints now extended away from the car, trailing into the darkness beyond the shoulder and into the brush. I froze, heart hammering. Whoever had been circling the car had left. I debated whether to follow them, but common sense won. No way was I wandering into unknown woods at night. Instead, I got back into the car and locked the doors. The lock felt cold under my fingers, but it was a small comfort. A breeze picked up, carrying the faint scent of burnt wood and something else, something metallic, like oil or gasoline. My eyes scanned the roadside, but all I saw were shadows stretching endlessly in every direction. I kept my phone in my lap, flicking the screen on and off, hoping for a miracle signal. None came. An hour passed. Then 2. Each time I turned off the engine, the silence pressed in thicker, like a physical weight. I thought about the footprints again. Why circle the car? Why leave and then come back? Had I been watched the whole time? The idea made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the quiet shattered with a distant sound, a crunch of gravel, faint but unmistakable. I looked up, heart leaping, scanning the empty highway. A pair of headlights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter. Relief washed over me, and I grabbed my phone to signal frantically, waving my arms out the window. The vehicle slowed, then stopped several yards away. A man got out, tall and lean, his face shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap. He held a flashlight that cut a narrow beam across the asphalt. "Car trouble?" he called out, voice low but steady. I nodded eagerly. Yes. Won't start. No signal on my phone either. He took a couple of steps closer, the beam of his flashlight passing over my face. There was something off about him, an unreadable expression, like he was measuring me. "Got water?" "Food?" he asked suddenly. "No," I replied, feeling a flicker of unease. He shrugged. "I'm heading toward that town," he said, gesturing down the road. "If you want, I can give you a lift." I hesitated. Something about the way he spoke, the way he stood just out of reach, put me on edge. But the alternative was spending the night stranded on this empty highway. "Okay," I said finally, locking the car and stepping toward him. As we walked toward his vehicle, a battered pickup with faded paint, I glanced back at my car. The footprints were still visible, faint in the dirt, but no one was circling now. Or so I hoped. Inside the truck, the air smelled of cigarettes and old leather. The man started the engine without a word and pulled onto the highway. I kept my eyes on the dark and empty roadside, scanning for any movement, any sign that I wasn't alone. "Name's Jack," he said after a moment, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. I gave my name back cautiously. The road stretched ahead, black and deserted, the only sound the rumble of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. "Why did you stop?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He shrugged. Few miles back, seen a guy hitchhiking. Looked a little lost. Figured maybe he needed help. His eyes flicked to me, serious now. You sure you don't want me to take you all the way into town? It's not safe out here after dark. I swallowed hard. The footprints. The way he'd appeared out of nowhere. The uneasy feeling in my gut. But there was no signal on my phone, and the highway behind me stretched empty and dark. Yeah, I said, I'd like that. As he nodded and sped up, I kept watching the roadside, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence again. Because out here, the silence was never empty. The sun had completely disappeared by the time I mustered the courage to step outside again. Earlier that evening, before I even noticed the footprints, I told myself I was just overthinking things. I'd been alone for hours, hungry, and maybe a little scared, so my mind was playing tricks. But now, after watching those odd tracks encircle my car, some looping back on themselves, others pressed close or oddly spaced, I couldn't deny that something wasn't right. Those prints weren't animal marks. They were too deliberate, too human. I crouched down beside the front tire and squinted in the failing light. The soil was packed hard but soft enough to hold the prints clearly. The shoe treads looked fresh, some with heel marks that suggested a heavy step, maybe booted. I ran my fingers over the edges of one print. The dirt felt disturbed, loose, like someone had lingered there, shifting weight back and forth. But who and why? My mind reeled with possibilities. A passing stranger? A hunter? Someone looking for trouble? None of it made sense. I was miles away from the nearest town, with no houses or trails nearby. The highway itself was deserted. No other cars had passed since my breakdown, as far as I could tell. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and decided I needed to do something other than freeze on the side of the road. The question was, what? My phone was useless, buried deep in my bag with no signal and steadily losing battery. I figured I'd make a break for it. The map app I downloaded before losing service showed a small cluster of buildings about 6 miles west, just beyond a bend in the highway. I'd try to reach them on foot. Maybe there was a gas station or a convenience store where I could call for help. I grabbed my backpack, slid it on, and popped the trunk to retrieve the bottle of water and snack bar I'd packed in case of emergencies. The car looked even more forlorn in the moonlight, the dark windows reflecting the empty road behind me like eyes watching silently. Before I moved, a sudden noise froze me in place, a faint rustling from the tall grass bordering the highway. I spun around, heart hammering. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was still. The noise came again, subtle but deliberate, like a footstep dragging through dried weeds. My breath caught. I strained to see, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the first few feet. I whispered my own name, embarrassed by the panic rising in my chest. No answer. I swallowed hard and kept my eyes fixed on the grass, my body tense to run. The rustling stopped. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to move. I stepped onto the asphalt, the gravel crunching underfoot. The highway stretched out, a ribbon of black beneath the stars, empty and silent except for the occasional distant bark of a coyote or the low hum of insects. I started walking, trying to keep a steady pace, eyes darting between the road ahead and the shadows to my left. I felt exposed, a lone figure on a desolate highway, at the mercy of whatever might be watching. The cool air did little to soothe the heat of rising fear. About 15 minutes into the walk, I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting behind a clump of bushes off the roadside, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. The hairs on my arms stood up. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the road. The moon was higher now. It gave enough light to see the horizon clearly and the faint glimmer of lights far ahead, possibly the town. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from behind me, making me jump and spin around. My heart slammed against my ribs. The highway was empty, no cars, no people. Just the night and the endless black ribbon of pavement. I started walking faster, adrenaline surging through me. That wasn't an animal. It sounded too heavy, deliberate. After another 10 minutes of hurried steps, I forced myself to stop and listen. Breathing hard, I scanned the darkness. Then I saw it again, footprints. They circled the road in a strange pattern, zigzagging across the asphalt and into the grass. The prints were fresh, definitely human. They had to be. My mind raced. Maybe it was a prank, some local kids messing around. But why would they follow me this far, and why hadn't I heard any voices or laughter? I pulled out my phone to check the battery. 22% left. It was draining fast in the cold night air. I tried the call button again. No service. Not even an emergency call. The little no service icon blinked mockingly at me. Then I heard footsteps again, this time closer. They weren't random. They were moving parallel to me, just inside the grass, keeping pace. I froze. Hello? I called softly into the darkness, my voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. The footsteps paused. I held my breath. Then a voice, low and rough, floated from the shadows, lost. I couldn't see anyone, but the voice was close, too close. My hands clenched into fists. Who's there? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. Then more footsteps, scraping and heavy, moving around me in a slow circle. Panic rose like bile in my throat. I broke into a run, heading toward the faint lights of the town, ignoring the gravel digging into my shoes, my breath ragged. Behind me, the footsteps followed. I didn't look back. The lights grew brighter. I ran harder. As I neared what I hoped was safety, headlights suddenly blinded me from the opposite lane. A car sped past, swerving slightly as if to avoid something or someone in the road. I shouted, waving my arms frantically. The car didn't stop. I collapsed onto the shoulder, gasping, heart pounding like a drum. The footsteps stopped. The night fell silent again, except for the distant hum of the highway and my ragged breathing. I was still out here, alone. And whatever had been circling my car and following me wasn't done yet. I sat on the cracked asphalt, my back resting against the side of the car, eyes fixed on the patch of disturbed dirt and gravel circling the vehicle. The sun had fully set now, and the temperature dropped sharply. The chill seeped through my jacket, but I didn't move. I couldn't stop staring at those prints, as if they held the key to why my car had died in the middle of nowhere. I took out my phone again, not that it had any signal, and checked the battery. 42%. Not much, but enough to keep the flashlight on if I needed it. The silence pressed in. No cars, no distant lights, no voices. Just the whispering whine through the dry grass. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling clinging to my skin. I forced myself to stand and walk around the car. The footprints were fresh. I could tell because the soil was still loose, the edges crisp. Nothing else disturbed the dirt, not a tire track, not a broken twig. Whoever had been here hadn't come by vehicle. They'd been on foot. And that meant they could still be nearby. I glanced back up the highway, then down it. Both ways stretched out like ribbons of black asphalt disappearing into shadow. The nearest light was the dim glow of my car's interior, and the distant stars overhead, pinpricks of cold fire. I thought about walking. 6 miles to the nearest town. 6 miles that might take 2 hours or more in the dark, over uneven ground, with no clear path. But staying meant sitting in a broken-down car surrounded by strange footprints and no way to call for help. I decided to grab my backpack from the trunk, just in case. Inside, I had a bottle of water, a granola bar, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. Not much, but enough for a short walk. As I leaned into the trunk, the beam from my flashlight caught a flash of movement near the edge of the tree line beside the highway. I froze. A figure stepped out from the shadows. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. His jeans were dirty, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. "Hey," I said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Do you know how far to the nearest town?" He stepped closer, his face still hidden in shadow. "Depends what you're willing to pay." I swallowed hard. The air suddenly felt thick, suffocating. "I'm just stranded. My car broke down." He took another step closer, closer than comfortable, close enough that I could see the lines of dirt smudged across his cheek. "Stranded, huh? Lot of folks get stranded out here. You got anything worth trading?" I glanced down at my backpack. Water, food, phone with no signal. Not exactly valuable. "I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to get to town." He chuckled, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Trouble's the only thing you're gonna find out here. You got a phone?" I held it up, screen cracked but working. No signal. He nodded slowly, like he knew this was exactly how it would go. Figures. There was a long pause. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small pocket knife, the blade catching the flashlight's beam. "Listen, I'm not here to hurt you. But this highway's not safe after dark. There's folks out here who'd like to take what you've got. You got nothing, but you're still in the way." My heart pounded in my chest. I forced myself not to back away. "I'm just going to town, then I'm gone." He smiled briefly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Smart. But if you want to make it there alive, you better listen to me. Walk off the highway. Stay in the trees as much as you can. And keep your flashlight off unless you want to get noticed." I nodded, trying to swallow my fear and keep my voice steady. "Thanks. I appreciate it." He turned away, disappearing back into the shadows of the trees. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore before grabbing my pack and pulling the hood of my jacket over my head. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew he was right. The footprints around my car hadn't been random. Someone had been watching me, waiting to see what I would do. And if that guy was out here, there could be others. I switched off my flashlight and stepped off the pavement onto the uneven ground. The grass was prickly and dry, and the dirt shifted underfoot. I kept close to the tree line, shadows folding me in, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. The highway loomed just a few feet away, a ribbon of dark asphalt slick under the moonlight. I resisted the urge to look behind me, to see if those footprints were following. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to keep moving. Every crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounded like a shout in the silence. I scanned the edge of the trees, every rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. I gripped the flashlight tightly, ready to flick it on if I needed to defend myself. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 30 minutes, I spotted the faint glow of a gas station sign in the distance. My chest lifted with a surge of relief. I moved faster, breaking from the tree line onto the highway in the last stretch. The hum of fluorescent lights and the faint murmur of voices were the most welcome sounds I'd heard all day. I reached the gas station and pushed through the door, the bell jingling overhead. Inside, a man behind the counter looked up, eyebrows knitting together when he saw my haggard appearance. "Long ride?" he asked. I nodded, voice dry but grateful. My car broke down about 6 miles back. No signal out there. He sighed, shaking his head. That stretch has been a problem for a while. Not many people want to stop out there after dark. I looked down at my hands. I saw footprints around my car. Someone's been out there. His expression darkened. "You should report it. People disappearing, things going missing. Folks don't talk about it much, but the sheriff's office has been getting calls." I swallowed hard. "I'm just glad I made it here." He nodded. "You're lucky." I filled my water bottle from the cooler, the cold liquid soothing my dry throat. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I'd need to figure out how to get my car fixed or find another way home. But for now, the warmth of the gas station felt like a small island of safety in a sea of darkness. As I stepped outside, the footprints lingering in my mind, I realized the highway hadn't been empty or quiet after all. It had been waiting for the right moment to show me just how dangerous being alone in the dark could be. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. Story 5, Lost Hours, Manipulated into Danger. I woke up on the floor again. The cold linoleum pressed against my cheek, and the taste of dust lingered in my mouth. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My head throbbed like a migraine was trying to break through the surface of my skull, and my vision was blurred. When I finally opened my eyes fully, I realized I was in the corner of a small, fluorescent-lit storage room. Boxes were stacked haphazardly along the walls, and the faint hum of a refrigerator unit from the adjacent break room buzzed overhead. I sat up slowly, my limbs stiff and uncooperative. My phone was missing from my pocket. Panic bubbled in my chest. I couldn't remember how I had gotten here. I tried to replay the last thing I knew. I was walking home from the coffee shop, carrying my laptop case and a cup of black coffee. That much was clear. After that, everything was a blank. I stood and stumbled toward the door, pushing it open to find myself behind a small grocery store. It was early morning, and the street outside was deserted. I pulled my jacket tight around me and fumbled for my phone in my bag. It wasn't there. That's when I noticed a crumpled piece of paper taped to the door frame. Squinting, I read the scrawled words, "You're running out of time." My breath caught. Whoever had left that note knew I had been here. But why? And more importantly, who? I had been having episodes like this for weeks now, waking up in strange places, with no memory of how I got there. Sometimes it was a park bench, sometimes a stranger's apartment, once in the back of a taxi. The worst part was the strange photos appearing on my phone whenever I managed to find it again. Pictures of me in the middle of dangerous situations, standing too close to the edge of a bridge, walking down a dark alley with a shadow looming behind me, climbing a fence that led into private property. Photos I had no memory of taking. Photos that made my stomach twist into knots. I remembered the last time I found my phone, just 2 days ago. The screen was cracked, but the gallery was still intact. That's when I saw a photo of myself hanging halfway over the railing of a rooftop, the city sprawled below like a ticking time bomb. I couldn't recall climbing up there. I didn't even know how I had gotten onto the roof of that building. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that someone was controlling my time, steering me into these situations, pulling me out before anything truly terrible happened. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The alternative was to believe I was losing my mind. I tried to call the police once. I told them about the missing hours, the strange photos, the messages that sometimes appeared on my phone, cryptic and threatening. They suggested I see a doctor, maybe get checked for seizures or something neurological. But every test came back clean. No explanation. It was as if I was slipping through cracks in reality, and no one could catch me. A shudder ran down my spine as I realized the implications. If someone was doing this to me, manipulating my time, dragging me into dangerous places, I was at their mercy. And every time I blacked out and woke up somewhere new, it was a loss. A loss of control, a loss of safety, a loss of myself. I made my way out of the store's back alley and onto the main street. The city was waking up. Cars rolled by, people shuffled into work, the usual hum of everyday life. None of them knew what was happening to me. None of them could help. I pulled out the only photo I had left from my phone's memory backup, the one from the rooftop, and stared at it. My face was pale, eyes wide with fear. Behind me, barely visible in the shadow, was a figure. I tried to make out who it was, but the picture was too grainy. As I stood there, trying to piece things together, my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. My heart jumped nearly out of my chest. I fumbled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "Stop searching. You're only making it worse." I wanted to reply, to demand answers, but my fingers froze. I was losing the fight to stay conscious, to hold on to every fragmented moment that made me who I was. And somewhere, in the shadows of this city, someone was watching. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my pounding heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear into the maze of alleys and side streets, but something deeper anchored me to the spot, a need to understand, to uncover the truth lurking just beyond my grasp. I scanned the horizon, eyes darting from one shadow to another, but no figure emerged. The city's usual hum felt distorted, as if reality itself was holding its breath. My vision blurred, and I leaned against the cold brick wall, fighting the urge to collapse. The grainy picture from before replayed in my mind, the distorted face teasing me with its elusive familiarity. Then, just as I thought I might succumb to the darkness, my phone vibrated again. This time, the screen displayed a different message. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Walk away now, or there won't be anything left to find." The words burned through me, but beneath the fear, a stubborn flame ignited. Whoever was watching, whoever was sending these warnings, they underestimated me. I wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. I pocketed the phone once more, took a shaky breath, and stepped back into the night, determined to follow the trail no matter where it led. I stared at the crumpled piece of paper taped to the doorframe, my fingers trembling as I tried to smooth it out. "Stop looking. You're not safe. They're watching." My breath caught. Who was watching me? Why was I here, in this cold, forgotten storage room? And why couldn't I remember how I got here? I shoved the note into my jacket pocket, my mind racing. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to get somewhere safe. I scanned the area outside again, empty street, no cars, no people. My phone was still missing, and for a moment, panic clawed its way up my throat. Without it, I was blind. I couldn't check messages, calls, or even the time. The only thing I had was the note. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, and then I walked down the street toward the main road, hoping to find a cafe or a gas station, somewhere with a security camera or a friendly face. As I moved, I tried to retrace my steps in my head. I remembered leaving the coffee shop with my laptop bag, walking toward my apartment a few blocks away. But somewhere between then and now, a chunk of time was missing, an unaccounted gap that stretched at least an hour or more. When I reached the corner store, I paused, hesitating before pushing the door open. The bell jingled softly. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the clerk looked up from behind the counter, eyes narrowing as they took in my disheveled appearance. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked cautiously. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Do you have a phone charger I could buy? My phone died last night, and I need to charge it." The clerk shrugged and pointed to a shelf near the register. I grabbed the charger, paid with cash from my wallet, and moved toward the small seating area at the back, plugging my phone in at the only outlet. The screen lit up immediately. There were dozens of new notifications, messages, missed calls, emails. But what caught my eye were the photos. Hundreds of them. Most blurry, some terrifyingly clear, each showing me in situations I didn't remember being in. One photo showed me crouched behind a dumpster alleyway, eyes wide, hands clutching my jacket as if I were hiding. Another showed me stepping off a curb just as a car was speeding toward me, the headlights glaring like twin eyes. There was a picture of me pressed against a brick wall, face flushed with panic, my phone out in front of me as if I'd been trying to call for help. And yet another showed me sitting on a bench in a dark park, head in my hands, trembling. The timestamps spanned the last 2 days, but the moments they captured were ones I had no recollection of, moments I had lost. I scrolled faster, heart pounding. In one photo, a shadowy figure was just visible behind me, blurred but unmistakably there. The same figure appeared in several images, always lurking, always close enough to grab me if I turned around. I felt cold. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. Then a text message popped up. No number, just a string of digits. "Why do you keep trying to remember? You're safer when you don't." I froze. The message wasn't a warning. It was a threat. I tried to respond, to call the number back, but the phone buzzed again before I could type a word. "Look outside your window. Now!" My heart jumped into my throat. I risked a glance out the store's front window. The street was empty. No one in sight. I turned back to the phone. Another message. Outside isn't always outside. It didn't make sense. Was someone playing games with me? Was this some sick prank? Then I remembered the note taped to the doorframe. They're watching. Whoever they were close. Too close. I needed to get home, to my apartment, where I could lock the door and maybe gather my thoughts. But when I tried to stand, the world spun violently. My stomach flipped, and the lights inside the store seemed to pulse and warp. I blinked hard, gripping the edge of the table for support. My vision blurred again. Darkness edged the corners of my sight. I was losing the fight to stay conscious. I fought it for a few seconds longer, but everything slipped away. When I came to, I was lying on my couch, under a thin blanket, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. I sat up slowly, heart hammering. How had I gotten home? I didn't remember walking through my front door. I checked the time, 3:14 a.m. Another chunk of the day gone. I looked at the phone. New photos had appeared overnight. One was of me, asleep on the same couch, phone screen glowing in my hand. Another showed my front door, snapped from the outside. Someone had been watching me at home. My skin crawled. I tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through. Instead, a message popped up, "Not safe to call." Not yet. My phone buzzed again. This time, a photo appeared of my bedroom window, taken from the street. I could see my curtains trembling slightly, and shadows moving just beyond the glass. I sank back against the couch, breath shallow. I wasn't imagining this. Someone had taken control of my time, my body, and my every move. They were controlling when I was awake and when I wasn't. They were controlling me. But why? And how? As I tried to piece together what little I could, a sound outside the apartment made me freeze, a soft tapping at the window. I didn't dare look. Instead, I texted back the number that had been messaging me. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who knows you better than you know yourself. And someone who's always watching." The line went dead. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just losing chunks of time. I was losing control. And whoever was doing this wasn't going to stop until they had everything. I was running out of time. And I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be awake to fight back. I didn't want to believe it at first. I woke up that morning on the floor of my apartment, my head pounding like a sledgehammer hitting a metal drum. My vision was doubled for a second, but the familiar clutter of my living room filtered into focus quickly. The couch I collapsed on the night before, my coffee mug with the chipped rim on the table, the half-open laptop blinking a frozen screen. Nothing felt right, though. The clock said 2:17 p.m., and I had no memory of the day so far. I tried to piece things together, but my mind was a white canvas with no marks. That's when I noticed the photos. My phone was on the kitchen counter, face down. I snatched it up and flipped it over. The screen lit up with notifications from messages I didn't remember sending and calls I hadn't answered. Then I opened the gallery app, scrolling through pictures taken over the last 24 hours. And it hit me like a punch in the gut. There I was, in every photo, sometimes standing on the edge of a busy street, sometimes sitting on a park bench in the rain, once balancing precariously on the ledge of a second-story window. Each image was time-stamped, but none of those times matched the fragments of memory I could scrape together. My expression in those photos was strained, almost vacant, like I was somewhere else entirely, trapped inside my own body. I swallowed hard and tried to call my best friend, Sam. The line went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, can we meet?" "Something's wrong." No response. That's when I realized the phone had been taken from my pocket before I blacked out, just like the first time I woke up in that storage room. Someone was following me, watching me, controlling where and when I went unconscious. But why? And how? I shoved the phone in my pocket, grabbed my jacket, and left my apartment. The streets felt colder than usual, or maybe I was just colder inside. Every shadow seemed to twitch at the edge of my vision, every passerby's glance a calculated threat. I made my way to the coffee shop where I'd started my mysterious day, and where I'd last remembered being conscious. It was late afternoon now, the place nearly empty except for the barista cleaning the espresso machine. "Hey," I said, voice hoarse. "Did you see me earlier today?" She looked up, eyebrows knitted. "Sorry, no. You were here last night, though, right? Around 11? I nodded, the knot tightening in my stomach. "Did anyone else come in after I left?" She shook her head again. "No one unusual. You seemed fine when you left." I forced a smile and thanked her, then stepped back out into the fading light. My mind raced, trying to map the missing hours. I pulled the phone back out to look deeper into the photos, focusing on the backgrounds. One image showed a street corner with a neon sign I recognized from a bar 3 blocks from my apartment. Another was a close-up of my feet on a wet sidewalk scattered with cigarette butts and crumpled receipts. In the distance, a van with tinted windows reflected the streetlights. The details felt too specific to be random. I decided I had to follow the trail. The bar wasn't crowded when I arrived, but the place smelled thick with stale beer and desperation. I took a seat near the window, scanning faces for anything familiar. The bartender wiped down the counter, glancing over at me every so often with what looked like guarded curiosity. Can I get a coffee? Black. She nodded without a word and set to work. While I waited, I dug through my phone again, searching for clues. The timestamps showed that the photos were taken in intervals, sometimes a few minutes apart, sometimes stretching to hours. Whoever was controlling my time had a method to it. They wanted me awake just long enough to be disoriented, but never long enough to figure out what was happening. The bartender came back with the coffee and set it down gently. You look like you haven't slept, she said, voice low. I hesitated before replying. You wouldn't happen to have seen anything strange today? Any unfamiliar faces hanging around? She shook her head, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, maybe guilt. Or maybe she just didn't want to get involved. I thanked her and left, stepping back out onto the street. The sun was dipping behind the buildings, shadows stretching long. I felt like I was running out of time, or maybe running out of the ability to stay awake and aware of myself. I had to find out who was doing this before the next blackout. On the walk back, I noticed a man across the street watching me. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. When I looked directly at him, he vanished into a narrow alley. My heart hammered in my chest. I crossed the street and edged closer to the alleyway entrance. It was a cramped space between two old brick buildings, littered with empty bottles and graffiti scrawled in faded paint. I called out softly, "Hey! I saw you." Silence. I took a step in, and suddenly a hand grabbed my arm from behind. It was rough, pulling me backward. I twisted and shoved the man away, stumbling onto the sidewalk. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice shaking. The man said nothing, but I saw the glint of a phone in his hand, and then he sprinted into the crowd. That was the final piece, the confirmation I had dreaded. Someone was orchestrating this nightmare, watching me through cameras or phones, deciding when I was awake and when I wasn't. It wasn't random. It wasn't supernatural. It was calculated. I was losing. That night, I did everything I could to stay awake. I poured coffee, paced my apartment, and kept my phone close. But exhaustion crept in like a thief in the dark, and I felt myself slipping. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You can't run." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my mind. I didn't know who was behind this, but I knew they were close. Too close. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could fight to stay conscious or alive. I woke up on the bathroom floor. The last thing I recalled was being at the coffee shop near the office, ordering a latte, checking my email, and then heading out to meet a client. But now, here I was, lying in a stranger's bathroom, my breath shallow and my limbs weak. The door creaked open, and I scrambled upright, heart hammering. It was the woman from the photos. Her eyes were cold, calculating, but there was a flicker of something else, maybe pity? Or amusement. I couldn't tell as she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're awake," she said softly, voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear. That's progress. Or am I? My throat was dry, and I had to swallow hard to get the words out. Not that it matters much, but you're in my apartment. Well, technically, my boyfriend's place. He's out right now. I wanted to talk to you, face to face. I stared at her, disbelief and fear warring inside me. Why? What do you want? She smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. I want you to understand why I've been helping you. You see, you've been missing parts of your day, right? Waking up in places you don't recognize, photos on your phone you don't remember taking? I nodded cautiously. That's because someone else is living parts of your life for you. Someone who knows you better than you know yourself. She paused, watching me carefully. And that someone is me. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? Why? She stepped closer, and the scent of her perfume filled the room, something sharp, floral, and unsettlingly familiar. Because you're important. Because I need you to see the world differently. You get caught up in your little routines, your safe, boring life. But life isn't safe, and it certainly isn't boring if you know where to look. I shook my head, trying to keep the panic from rising. You're controlling me. You're drugging me. Why? What's your end game? She laughed softly, a sound that was both light and cruel. End game? I'm not some villain in a movie. This is real life, and real life is messy. I'm trying to wake you up. To show you what you're missing. I looked down at my phone, which she had placed on the sink earlier. The screen lit up with a photo gallery filled with images I didn't remember taking, me standing on the edge of a busy street, staring down traffic, me holding a knife by a dimly lit alley, me in the passenger seat of a car speeding through the city at night, eyes wide with fear. Why these photos? What do they mean? I whispered. There are moments when you are awake enough to see the truth. Or at least close to it. She smiled again, but this time it was colder. You're losing this fight to stay conscious, but it's not about sleep or memory. It's about control. And I'm the one holding the reins. I felt my hands tremble, and I realized how tired I was, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee or sleep seemed to fix. What do you want from me? She leaned over, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I want you to be honest with yourself. You think you're in control, but you're not. You're just surviving each day without really living. I'm giving you a choice: wake up or keep sleeping. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. The last few days had felt like a blur of confusion and fear, but now it was clear. Someone had been orchestrating this all along. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate me, how to break down my defenses without leaving obvious marks. Why me? Why pick me? I asked, voice cracking. Because you're vulnerable, she said simply. You're predictable. And because you're not as alone as you think. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Alone? I didn't understand what she meant, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere. I needed to get out. I needed to find my phone, my keys, anything that could help me escape. Can I use your phone? I asked, trying to sound casual. She shook her head. No phones. No distractions. Just us, for now. The bathroom door creaked again, and my heart leapt into my throat. I caught a glimpse of a man's shadow slipping past the hallway outside. Her boyfriend. Or the man she had spoken about. She saw me notice and shrugged. He's harmless. Mostly. I didn't buy it. I backed away slowly, trying to figure out my next move. My head was spinning, but I knew I had to keep calm. This woman controlled more than just my days, she controlled my fear. And if I didn't take control back, I would lose myself completely. She smiled again, watching my every move. You don't have to fight me, she said softly. Not yet. But you will have to make a choice soon. And it won't be easy. I turned toward the door, heart pounding. The hallway seemed longer than it should be, the shadows darker, the silence heavier. Every step felt like I was moving through quicksand. Outside the apartment, the city carried on, oblivious. But inside, I was trapped in someone else's story, a story I didn't agree to be part of. And I was running out of time. The weight of her words settled over me like a storm cloud. There was no turning back now. Whatever path I chose would change everything. That morning started like any other, or at least as normal as my mornings had been lately. I grabbed my phone and unlocked it. Instantly, a dozen new photos filled the gallery, all taken within the past 2 hours. I flicked through them quickly, my stomach tightening. There I was, disheveled, terrified, in places I didn't recognize. One photo showed me sitting on a bench in a dark alley, eyes wide and sweat glistening on my forehead. Another had me standing near busy traffic, staring at a car that was mere feet away, the headlights glaring like a spotlight. None of it matched any recollection. I swiped through the timestamps. The photos were taken between 6 and 7 a.m., a block of time I couldn't account for. I tried to think back, but the memories were like smudges, something blurred and out of reach. I wasn't sure if I was scared of what I'd done or what had been done to me. I put my phone down and tried to steady myself. I needed answers. But where to start? My apartment was quiet, nothing out of place except the gnawing feeling that I wasn't alone in my own life anymore. I decided to check my messages. Maybe someone had texted me. There were no new texts, but there was a new voicemail. I hesitated but pressed play. "Hey," the voice was low, calm. "You don't remember, do you? We're running out of time. You need to listen if you want to keep yourself safe. The next time you're awake, make sure you can see me." The voicemail cut off abruptly. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my heart pounding. Who was this? What was this supposed to mean? I didn't know anyone who would do this to me, and I had no idea what the message was referencing. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The city was just waking up, streets filling with the usual morning bustle. But even amid the crowd, I felt exposed, as if invisible eyes were watching me. I walked to the nearby coffee shop, the same place where my last clear memory had ended. I needed to retrace my steps, find any hint of what had happened. As I approached, the barista gave me a cautious nod but didn't say much. I noticed the cashier glancing around nervously. Something was off. I pulled out my phone again and checked the photos from the night before. There was one picture I hadn't noticed earlier, taken at about 11:30 p.m., showing me sitting on a bench outside a bar, face streaked with rain and exhaustion. Another showed me standing in a busy intersection, but the expression on my face this time was different, determined, almost angry. I scrolled further, and that's when I saw it, a series of photos, timestamped just minutes apart, showing a man approaching me from behind. His face was obscured by a baseball cap, but his build was stocky, and he wore a dark jacket. I'd never seen him before. The photos revealed him reaching out to grab my arm. The last one showed me looking over my shoulder, eyes wide, and then, nothing. That was the point where my memories had stopped. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Someone had been following me, watching me, manipulating where I was and when I woke up. The idea was terrifying, but what chilled me most was that they seemed to have control over my consciousness itself. I stood outside the coffee shop, skimming through the photos again, trying to find some clue. Then it hit me, the photos were taken on my phone. Someone had access to my device or had planted it on me during those missing hours. My mind raced. I hadn't noticed the phone missing at any point, so maybe it was never gone. Maybe I had been unconscious but still connected enough to be photographed. Or maybe I was drugged, and my attacker was using my own phone to torment me. Determined to find out more, I decided to visit the police station. It felt like the logical next step, even though I had no idea how to explain what was happening without sounding insane. At the station, I was met with polite but skeptical officers. Officer Nguyen listened patiently as I explained my situation, missing time, waking up in strange places, and the photos on my phone. "We've seen cases where people get drugged and taken advantage of," she said cautiously. Do you have any idea who might be behind this? I shook my head. No. But someone's definitely controlling me somehow. She nodded thoughtfully and took my phone to examine it. After a few minutes, she looked up. There's no sign of tampering on your phone. No spyware or remote access apps. But these photos, it does look like they were taken with your phone's camera. How is that possible if I don't remember taking them? I asked. Could be someone had physical access to your phone and took the pictures. That explanation made sense. If someone was drugging me or knocking me out, they could have held the phone and taken pictures to intimidate me. But then again, why send me these photos? To what end? Officer Nguyen promised to file a report and have someone check surveillance footage from the nearby streets. I left the station feeling both relieved and more vulnerable than ever. Back on the street, I sat on a bench and scrolled through the photos again. My eyes caught something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of a few pictures, there was a white van parked just around the corner. In one photo, the driver's side window was down, and a shadowy figure was visible inside. I snapped the photo open and zoomed in as much as my phone would allow. The figure was impossible to identify, but the van's license plate was partially visible. I took a screenshot and made a mental note to report this to the police. As I sat there, trying to piece everything together, my phone buzzed with a new message. The screen lit up. Stop looking for me, or the next time you wake up, you won't wake up at all. My jaw clenched, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was a threat, a promise. I realized then how deep this nightmare went. Someone was orchestrating my life, watching my every move, deciding when I was awake and when I was out cold. They had breached every boundary, invading my privacy, my safety, and my mind. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I pocketed my phone and scanned the street. Cars rolled by, people hurried past, oblivious to the danger stalking one of their own. I felt small, vulnerable, but I also felt a flicker of resolve. If someone was controlling my time, I had to find a way to wrest it back. To stay conscious. To stay alive. I stood up and started walking, eyes sharp, heart pounding, every sense screaming that the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And I was losing. Story 6, Freeway to Oblivion, stranded after the quake. The ground stopped shaking as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a silence so intense I could hear my own ragged breathing and the distant groan of twisted metal. For a moment, I sat frozen, heart hammering, ears ringing. The aftershocks were relentless. Somewhere behind me, a tanker truck didn't have the same luck. It exploded in a fireball that painted the sky orange. I forced the engine off, swallowed hard, and tried my phone. No signal. I toggled airplane mode, rebooted it, nothing. From the way the freeway was buckled and littered with debris, I realized the roads were probably impassable for miles. The emergency broadcasts had been offline almost instantly, no warnings, no instructions, nothing but static when I tried to tune the radio. My name is Alex Carter, and if I was lucky, this wasn't going to be the worst day of my life. I gathered what I could from the car, a half-empty water bottle, the small first aid kit in the glove compartment, a granola bar stuck to the underside of the seat. The heat was climbing fast, the sun was already high, beating down through the cracked windshield like an oven. The air inside the car was stale and thick with dust. I stepped outside, blinking against the dust and the bright light. The freeway was a disaster zone. The concrete had cracked and buckled wildly, huge chunks missing altogether. Cars were abandoned everywhere, some flipped over, others crushed beneath slabs of cement. A few people stumbled along the median, faces streaked with dirt and blood, their eyes wild with shock. I didn't have a plan, Not really. The only thing I knew was what I'd overheard on faint radio chatter before everything went dark. There was a safe zone, somewhere north of here, past the city limits. They said it was set up by the National Guard or FEMA, a place with clean water, food, and medical aid. That was all I had, an unconfirmed rumor, a thread of hope I wasn't willing to let go. I hoisted my backpack off the passenger seat. It was mostly empty, just a few clothes and my laptop charger. Not much help now. I stuffed the granola bar and water bottle inside, then set off on foot, moving cautiously around the wreckage. The heat was brutal, and there was no shade. I kept my head down, eyes scanning constantly. Every few steps, I hear the distant sound of raised voices, sometimes shouting, sometimes crying. People. Survivors. Some were injured, others seemed to be arguing over supplies or directions. A few eyed me with suspicion as I passed by, clutching what little they'd managed to salvage. A young woman with a scraped face caught up to me, her clothes torn and stained. "Do you know if the safe zone's really north?" she asked, voice hoarse. Her name was Mara. I nodded, trying to sound confident. "That's what I heard. We should stick together." We moved on, joining a small group of others who were slowly making their way along the edge of the collapsed freeway. The air was thick with tension, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something darker, something like desperation. At one point, we passed a collapsed overpass where a makeshift encampment had sprung up. People were gathered around a fire, cooking something in a dented pot. I saw an older man arguing with a younger one. Their voices rose, harsh and angry. Mara pulled me back just as the younger man lunged forward, grabbing the older by the collar. The older man shoved him hard, and the crowd parted quickly. "Violence is contagious," Mara muttered grimly. "We need to keep moving." Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the shattered highway. We rationed water carefully, each sip precious. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, a dull ache that wouldn't go away. My feet ached from walking on uneven concrete and jagged debris. At one point, we heard a commotion up ahead, a group of men blocking the path, armed with makeshift weapons, metal pipes, wooden bats. They were demanding supplies from anyone who passed by. When one of our group hesitated, a shout went up, followed by the sickening sound of a fist connecting with a face. I clenched my jaw and kept my head down as Mara whispered, "We can't lose our stuff, but we can't fight them either." We waited until the men's attention was elsewhere, then slipped past, hearts pounding. I realized then that the safe zone wasn't just about surviving nature's wrath, it was about surviving people. By the time darkness settled in, we found a narrow gap between two fallen concrete slabs and huddled there, sharing what little warmth we could. The night was cold and unforgiving. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the faint sound of sirens echoed, ghosts of a world that felt impossibly far away. I lay back against the rough concrete, eyes fixed on the stars, which seemed impossibly bright and indifferent. Ahead of me was a long, uncertain journey, with dehydration, starvation, and violence stalking every step. But as long as there was breath in my lungs, I would move forward. Because waiting meant dying out here alone. And I wasn't ready for that. I closed my eyes, listening to the ragged breaths and whispered prayers of my small group, and tried to push the fear down deep enough to sleep. Tomorrow, we'd walk again. Tomorrow, I'd keep fighting to reach the safe zone. I shoved the cracked windshield open and climbed out, blinking against the harsh sunlight that felt as unforgiving as the silence around me. I took a deep breath, tasting dust and heat. My water bottle was nearly empty, the granola bar a sad consolation for the gnawing hunger settled in my stomach. There was no way I could stay here. The rumors about the safe zone had to be real, or at least better than this nightmare. The plan was simple: get off the freeway, find a way south along the old back roads, and keep moving until I found people, survivors who might know more, who might be going the same way. I looked back once before stepping onto the cracked asphalt. The earth was still trembling faintly beneath my feet, but I had no choice. I moved cautiously, careful not to step on unstable chunks of concrete or dislodged metal. The air was thick with dust and exhaust fumes. The occasional distant scream or shout cut through the oppressive quiet, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this hell. About half a mile ahead, I spotted a collapsed overpass. Its massive concrete beams had crashed down onto the road in a chaotic tangle, forming a barrier that was impossible to cross on foot. I detoured to the shoulder, where the ground was less wrecked but littered with debris and shattered glass. It was then I saw them, a group of people huddled under the shade of a broken signpost, eyes sunken and clothes torn. They were a motley crew, a woman clutching a small child to her chest, a man with a bloody gash across his forehead, and two teenagers who looked as scared and tired as I felt. I hesitated. I didn't know if they were hostile or desperate. But I needed information, and maybe they needed help. I raised my hands in a non-threatening gesture and called out, "Hey! Are you okay?" The woman looked up, her eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. "We're fine, mostly," she said weakly. "If you're heading south, you might want to avoid the main roads. The gangs are out in force. We caught a group trying to rob a convoy earlier. They're armed, dangerous." A shiver ran down my spine. Violence was quickly becoming as big a threat as hunger or thirst. "Do you know if the safe zone is real?" I asked. The man with the forehead wound shook his head. "We've heard stories. Some kind of organized relief camp near the old airport. But it's a day's walk from here, and the roads are crawling with desperate people. You don't want to get caught alone." I nodded, weighing my options. Staying here meant waiting for help, for rescue, or for something worse. Moving forward meant risking dehydration or worse. But I couldn't wait. I had to keep moving. "Thank you," I said. "I'm Alex." "Maria," the woman replied, offering a weak smile. "You should come with us. There's safety in numbers." I hesitated again. I was used to traveling alone. But I couldn't deny the sense of relief at the thought of protection, even if temporary. "Okay," I said. "Let's go." The group gathered their meager belongings, and we started moving together, stepping carefully around the ruined highway. As we moved, Maria told me the basic outline of what she knew: hospitals overwhelmed, government aid cut off, water supplies drying up. Everyone was on edge, and the line between survivor and threat blurred with every passing hour. Hours passed. The sun marched across the sky, relentless and brutal. My water bottle was empty now. My lips were cracked and sore, and my stomach twisted painfully with hunger. The group's pace slowed as exhaustion took hold, but none of us stopped entirely. There was no safe place to rest. At one point, we rounded a bend and came face to face with a small convoy of vehicles blocking the road. Armed men stood guard, their eyes cold and calculating. Maria whispered, "Gang. They control the supplies around here." The tension in the air was suffocating. One of the teenagers, a boy no older than 15, stepped forward with tentative hands raised. It was clear they intended to negotiate, but the men were having none of it. Voices rose, threats flew, and suddenly the air was punctuated by shouts and the metallic click of weapons being readied. I froze, heart pounding, caught between the urge to run and the need to protect the group. Maria grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the shadows. The standoff lasted what felt like forever before the gang leader barked an order and the convoy moved on, leaving us shaken but unarmed. "Those men don't care who you are," Maria muttered. "They just want to control what little is left." We pressed on, hearts heavy with the knowledge that survival wasn't just about finding water or food, it was about outsmarting and outlasting people who had lost everything but their hunger for power. As dusk settled, the landscape around us became a blur of shadows and uncertainty. We found a small cluster of abandoned buildings and decided to rest, barricading the doors as best we could with whatever debris was at hand. Sleep was restless and short, filled with every nightmare I'd ever had about being hunted or trapped. The next morning, Maria's group was quieter, more wary. I could see it in their eyes, the growing desperation that came with each passing hour without reliable food or water. I pushed down my own panic and focused on what little I could control, my steps, my breath, my decisions. We broke camp before the sun rose fully, moving out with the first light. The path ahead was uncertain, riddled with dangers both seen and unseen, and I knew that every mile we traveled brought us closer to the edge of hope or the brink of disaster. But I had one thing they didn't, the stubborn refusal to give up. And for now, that was enough to keep me moving. The day stretched ahead, hot and merciless. I didn't know if the safe zone was real, or if we'd make it there alive. But I had to try. Because if I stopped, if I gave in to the fear, then the earthquake wouldn't be the worst thing to happen to me. The people left behind after it, that was the real danger. The sun was merciless as I stepped off the shattered highway and onto the rubble-strewn shoulder. I glanced back at the crushed remnants of my car, its metal frame warped beyond recognition. It was a strange kind of relief to leave it behind. That small, broken refuge was now a tomb in the middle of a shattered highway. Ahead, the freeway stretched into a jagged, impassable mess, collapsed overpasses twisted like paper, giant cracks splitting the lanes, and piles of debris where cars and trucks had been crushed beneath concrete. I'd heard whispered rumors of a safe zone somewhere to the south, beyond the city limits, where the military had supposedly established a relief camp. It was the only hope I had, even if it was just a story fueling desperation. The first few steps were cautious, not just because of the unstable ground, but because I wasn't alone. From behind a battered concrete barrier, a group of survivors emerged, their faces gaunt and eyes wide with fear. They were a ragtag mix, an older man clutching a limp child, a woman with dirt-smudged cheeks and a bandaged arm, and two teenage boys, both carrying makeshift spears fashioned from broken pipes. I stopped, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. They hesitated, their gazes flicking between me and the wreckage, wary but desperate. "How far to the safe zone?" the woman asked, her voice hoarse. "South, about 20 miles, I think," I said. "I'm heading that way." The older man nodded, his lips pressed tight. We heard the same. Military set it up near the river. Water, food, security. Security? I repeated, trying to read the tension in their faces. The teenage boy with the spear stepped forward, voice low. "There are others out there. People not so friendly. We've had to fight off gangs scavenging for supplies. Sometimes worse." Fear and resolve mixed in their eyes. We all knew violence was inevitable when desperation set in. I swallowed hard, glancing at my nearly empty water bottle. "We should stick together. It's safer in numbers." The woman nodded, then glanced over her shoulder. "We lost our group near the bridges. Too dangerous to wait." "Same here," the young boy said, tightening his grip on the pipe. "You got any supplies?" I shook the crumpled pack on my back. "Mostly water. A few granola bars." "Good enough," the woman said. "We'll share." We set off together, the cracked highway forcing us onto the dirt shoulder, weaving through wreckage and fallen street signs. The silence was punctuated only by the crunch of gravel beneath boots and the distant groan of settling concrete. No birds sang. No cars passed. The city had fallen silent. As we walked, the older man, who introduced himself as Frank, shared what they'd seen. The bridges collapsed early on. We tried to cross, but it was impossible. There are people trapped in their cars, screaming for hours. Rescue can't reach them. I swallowed hard, the image clawing at my insides. Did you see any help? The National Guard? Police? Frank shook his head. They're stretched thin. Some patrol near the city center, but out here, we're on our own. The woman, who said her name was Maria, pulled her jacket tighter around her. We passed a makeshift camp a few miles back. About 10 people. They looked desperate, some were armed. I felt a cold knot tighten in my belly. Desperation had already turned neighbors into threats. We kept moving, the sun inching westward, shadows growing longer and deeper. The terrain worsened. A steep embankment between the highway and the riverbanks forced us to climb down a narrow, crumbling slope. Loose dirt gave way underfoot. I caught Maria just as she slipped, her arms scraping against jagged rocks. "Are you okay?" I asked, examining the thin line of blood. "Just a scratch," she said, her smile weak. "Injuries will catch up with us soon enough." I nodded, knowing she was right. Every step sapped strength, and with no certainty the safe zone truly existed, every effort could be for nothing. Hours passed unevenly, as if time had lost meaning. The group's conversation waned, replaced by a tense quiet broken only by the distant sound of barking dogs and occasional shouting. Then, just as the last light dipped behind the hills, we heard it, shouting voices and the sharp ring of gunfire echoing from somewhere nearby. We froze. The teenagers exchanged looks, and Frank motioned for silence. "Gangs," he whispered. "They move in packs, taking what they want, no rules." I felt a prickle of fear. My heart pounded as we crouched behind a toppled road sign, peering through the growing darkness. The shouting grew louder, closer. I could make out a group, 6 or 7 men, armed with pistols and bats, shouting threats to someone. "Give us everything or you don't leave," one voice snarled. From the shadows near a broken wall, another voice answered, weaker but defiant. "We're just trying to move through." The sounds of scuffling and muffled cries followed. Then a single gunshot. A chill ran down my spine. The world had become a place where survival meant violence, where mercy was a luxury none could afford. Frank's eyes met mine. "We can't stay here." The group moved silently but quickly, pressing into the darkened forest that bordered the highway. Branches scraped my arms. The ground was uneven and slippery. I slipped once, catching myself just before a fall. After what felt like an eternity, we paused in a small clearing, catching our breath beneath the skeletal outline of a dead tree. Maria pulled out a tattered map, fingers trembling as she traced a faint red line. "The camp should be just beyond that ridge." "We should move before dawn," Frank said. "The gangs won't rest, and neither can we." I nodded, squeezing my eyes shut. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. My water bottle was nearly empty, and every muscle ached. But giving up wasn't an option. Not yet. As the night deepened, I lay against the rough bark, listening to the distant cries and the whisper of the wind through dead leaves. Somewhere out there, the safe zone waited. Somewhere out there, maybe there was a future beyond this nightmare. But for now, survival meant moving forward, through danger, through fear, through the unknown. And I had no choice but to keep going. By the time I reached the outskirts of what used to be the city's industrial district, the sun had dipped behind a thick haze of smoke and dust, casting everything in a sickly orange glow. The freeway was a nightmare. Sections had collapsed entirely. Some stretches were blocked by mangled vehicles, toppled power lines, and piles of rubble that looked like miniature mountains. I'd been forced off the highway hours earlier, climbing over guardrails and scaling heaps of twisted concrete just to keep moving forward. The safest path was the one that looked worse, places where the ground looked more stable and less likely to give way beneath my feet. I saw a group of people gathered near a crumpled bus shell at a bend in the road. They looked exhausted, gaunt faces, torn clothes, and eyes that flickered with desperation and suspicion. I hesitated but knew I needed water, food, or at least some information. The sun was setting fast, and the temperature was dropping, but cold meant little when exhaustion and dehydration were immediate threats. "Hey," I called out, raising my hands to show I wasn't a threat. "Water? Food? Anything?" A woman stepped forward. Her hair was tied back in a grimy braid, and her eyes were sharp, wary. "We don't have much. You got anything to trade?" I shook my head. "No. Just what I'm carrying." She glanced over my shoulder, then back at me. "You heading to the safe zone?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady even as I fought the dryness in my throat. "I am. Heard it's a few miles east." "You?" "Same," she said. "But it's getting dangerous out here, especially after dark." I nodded. I knew that too well. Violence had started creeping into every corner since the quake. People fighting over scraps, water, shelter, anything that might keep them alive. The quiet desperation was turning ugly. Suddenly, a shout cut through the stillness. I turned just in time to see a man sprinting toward the group, a battered baseball bat swinging wildly in his hands. The woman who'd spoken to me barked a warning, but there was barely time. The man swung the bat, striking another survivor square in the shoulder. The victim crumpled to the ground, groaning. Panic erupted. I didn't wait for an invitation. I shoved through the crowd, pulling the woman behind me. "Come on. We move. Now." We ran along the edge of the highway, dodging debris and the occasional broken glass shard that glittered in the fading light. Behind us, the group's shouts turned to chaos, some fighting back, others scattering into the shadows. "We can't stay here," the woman said breathlessly. "This road's a death trap at night." I agreed, though the thought of moving in darkness without a clear path terrified me. But the alternative, getting caught in another outbreak of violence, was worse. The safe zone was still miles away, and I had no idea if it even existed or was just another rumor born from the chaos. We kept walking, following the sun's last rays. The city's skeleton loomed around us, a half-collapsed office tower catching fire somewhere in the distance, smoke trailing into the darkening sky. The air smelled of ash and dust, thick and choking. Suddenly, the woman stopped and pointed toward a narrow alley between two buildings. "We can cut through here. It might be faster." I hesitated. Alleyways were dangerous, harder to see anyone coming, easy to get trapped. But time was against us, and the highway's chaos wasn't letting up. We ducked into the alley, shadows swallowing us. The walls were lined with cracked brick and peeling paint, graffiti faded and smeared by dust. Every step echoed sharply, a reminder of how isolated we were. Then I heard voices, low and harsh, coming from the end of the alley. Two men, maybe three, arguing over something. The tone was hostile, the kind of desperation that made people dangerous. I squeezed the woman's arm quietly. "We need to get past, but we have no weapons." She nodded, eyes scanning the ground. There was a rusted pipe nearby. I grabbed it, feeling its weight in my hand. Not much protection, but better than nothing. We edged forward, trying to stay in the shadows. The men's voices grew louder. "Give me the water," one hissed. "Or I'm taking it." "No way. We're all dying without it," the other snapped back. I swallowed hard. Water was the currency of survival now. The thought of losing what little I had was terrifying. One of the men suddenly spotted us. "Hey!" he barked, raising a fist. The other shouted, "Wait! Maybe they've got water." Before I could react, they were advancing toward us. I gripped the pipe tighter, muscles coiling to strike if necessary. The woman pulled out a small pocket knife, the blade barely glinting in the dim light. "Look, we don't want trouble," I said, voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "We're just passing through." The closest man sneered. "Everyone wants to pass through. Everyone wants to survive. No one gets out without paying." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was the new reality, barter or battle. Suddenly, the man with the bat from earlier stumbled into the alley behind them, clutching his bleeding arm. His eyes were wild. "They're coming, more of them. Move!" Without another word, chaos erupted. The two men looked at each other, then back at us, uncertainty flickering. I swung the pipe, connecting with a startled shoulder. The man grunted, stumbling back. The woman slashed at the other's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. They staggered, but were still dangerous. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing the woman's hand. We sprinted past them, adrenaline surging as we escaped the alley and plunged back into the main street. We didn't stop until we reached a cluster of burned-out cars, their blackened frames silhouetted against the night. I dropped to the ground, gasping for breath, the pipe clattering beside me. The woman sat down next to me, breathing hard. "We're not safe anywhere right now." "No," I agreed, my throat dry and voice hoarse. "But we have to keep going." I looked up at the dim stars, barely visible through the smoke. Somewhere beyond this wreckage, beyond the collapsed highways and desperate faces, was the safe zone. If it existed at all. And I was going to find it. But first, I had to survive the night. The sun was sinking low, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and purple as I stumbled across the skeletal remains of what used to be the I-5 freeway. I had been walking for hours, my water bottle long empty, my stomach rolling with hunger. But worse than thirst or hunger was the gnawing uncertainty, or was this safe zone they talked about? The supposed sanctuary, a place beyond the worst destruction, where aid and shelter waited. Rumors drifted through the ragged groups of survivors like smoke, but no proof. I paused on the cracked pavement, scanning the wreckage for any sign of movement. The silence was broken only by distant shouts and the occasional rumble of shifting rubble. The earthquake hadn't just shattered roads, it had fractured society. People were scared, desperate, and unpredictable. I spotted a figure ahead, slumped against a concrete barrier, an older man, his clothes torn, face sunburned and gaunt. He looked up as I approached, eyes wary but not hostile. "Water?" I asked, holding up my empty bottle. He shook his head and gave a dry cough. "No." "You?" "Empty." He winced. "Long way to go, friend. Safe zones, they say it's past the ridge. No idea if it's still standing." His voice was gravelly, worn thin by exhaustion. "Have you seen anyone else?" He nodded toward the east. "Couple dozen a few miles back. Some armed, some not. Haven't seen anything like a convoy or rescue." A low rumble made both of us look up. Dust billowed from a nearby collapsed overpass. Somewhere ahead, a group was moving, shouting harshly. "Sounds like trouble," I said, tightening my grip on the strap of my backpack. "We've all got trouble," he said, pushing himself up. "You heading there?" I nodded. "If it's the real deal." He gave me a long look, then turned and began limping away slowly. I watched him go before continuing eastward, heart pounding. The sun would be gone soon. Moving in the dark was dangerous, but staying put wasn't safe either. As I picked my way through the wreckage, I heard voices closer now, too many to ignore. I crouched behind a fallen street sign, squinting toward the noise. A small group of survivors, maybe 6 or 7, were arguing heatedly around the wreck of a pickup truck. One of them, a stocky man with a shaved head and a tattoo sneaking up his neck, gestured wildly, his voice sharp. "We can't all carry water," he said. "We find the safe zone, we share what we have. But that means no freeloaders." A younger woman, dirt-smudged and trembling, pleaded. "Please, I haven't eaten in days. I'm not asking for a handout, I just need a little." The man's eyes narrowed. "We all need something. But out here, you don't get charity." A sudden crash echoed behind them. A man stumbled over debris, clutching a torn bag. The group's attention snapped to him. "Got more water," he said, voice low. "Found a store. But it's dangerous. The cops won't help." "Where is it?" the tattooed man demanded. 2 miles south, near the old gas station." The group exchanged looks. The woman's face lit up briefly. "Can I come?" she asked. "No," the man said flatly. "It's too risky. We take what we can carry and move on." They started gathering supplies from the truck, loading water bottles and canned food into backpacks. I swallowed hard. No one was safe, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I slipped away quietly, choosing a route that would take me south, toward the gas station. If there was water there, it might buy me more time. The streets were a maze of destruction, storefronts shattered, cars overturned, fires smoldering in corners. I kept my head down, ears alert for footsteps or voices. People were everywhere, but most avoided eye contact, some clutching weapons or makeshift clubs. Approaching the gas station, I spotted a group huddled near the pumps. They looked tense, scanning the shadows as if expecting trouble. A man with a rifle leaned against a pillar, eyes sharp and cold. Beside him, a teenage boy clutched a baseball bat, knuckles white. I stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "I'm just looking for water," I said. The man's gaze flicked to me, then back to the group. One of the women, older and sturdier, stepped forward, her voice calmer. "Water's scarce. What do you have?" I patted my empty bottle. "Nothing right now." She studied me a moment, then nodded. "We found a few cases in the back. But we're guarding it." I nodded in understanding. "I'm not looking to fight. Just need a drink." They exchanged glances, then the man with the rifle motioned. "Fill up, quick. But no funny business." I kept my eyes on him as I refilled my bottle, the cold liquid a relief against my parched throat. A sudden noise, a shout, then the slam of a door made everyone tense. A group of younger men appeared at the edge of the street, faces hard, carrying crowbars and bats. They looked like trouble. "Looks like they want our supplies," the woman whispered. The rifleman cursed under his breath, stepping forward as the newcomers advanced. I froze, the worst-case scenario unfolding. Violence over water. The kind of desperation that broke people. Suddenly, one of the intruders shouted, "Give it up. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we're starving." The rifleman shook his head. "No way. You get nothing." A tense standoff. Then a loud crash as a crowbar smashed a window. Glass exploded. Shouts turned to screams. The crowd surged forward. Instinct took over. I dropped my bottle and ran, weaving between cars and overturned carts. Behind me, the chaos erupted, shouts, the crack of a bat striking something hard, a woman's scream. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward a narrow alleyway, heart pounding, lungs burning. There was no way I could fight, not like this, not without water or rest. The safe zone was still miles away, but I had to get there. Night was falling now, and the city felt less like a place and more like a trap. The distant sounds of violence echoed in my ears as I pushed forward, every step a battle against exhaustion. I knew I couldn't trust anyone, not yet. Trust was a luxury that no one here could afford. The road ahead was dark, uncertain, and unforgiving. But giving up wasn't an option. I had to keep moving.